Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Greger coming to you live from my treadmill to bring you the latest and greatest science on fasting. Something I knew next to nothing about until I did this deep dive into the medical literature for you. There are, by my count, 1,527 articles on fasting in the English language peer-reviewed scientific journals, and I read every single one of them, so you don't have to. Indeed, it took me about 2 years on and off to fit it in around all my other work, but I knew this was an important topic for people, so I soldiered on and compiled all the best science into about 30 videos, which I will drip out on NutritionFacts.org over the next 30 months up through the year 2022. But you don't have to wait because you're here on this webinar. Though only able to get about through half the fasting topics today, let me show you the breakdown here. All right. So today I'm going to focus on intermittent fasting for both weight loss and longevity, as well as caloric restriction and prolonged fasting on weight loss, as well as time-restricted feeding. And then in September, I'm going to do the rest of the fasting topics using water only and modified fasting techniques for disease reversal. Things like blood pressure, autoimmune disease, cancer, etc. Why not just do them all today? Because then it would be a 7-hour webinar. This one's going to be about 3 hours, and I'm afraid the next one's looking closer to 4 hours. So thought it would be good to split them up. All right, I've so been looking forward to this after years of digging through the research to bring this to you. Should be lots of fun, but first, just some housekeeping logistics. If you can't hear me right now, there are instructions in that email that was sent out earlier this week to tweak your audio settings. But if you can't hear me right now, you didn't just hear that. So let me paste that into the chat box, which you should see. If at any time you run into technical difficulties, there are live chat Zoom staff, that's the platform we're using now, standing by. And so let me paste that link as well. All right, if you are unable, if they are unable to help, then we also have NutritionFacts.org staff standing by too, though presumably if the Zoom people don't know what to do, I don't know what we'll be able to do either, but we are there for you regardless, and just posted that as well. You'll see a Q&A button. Please reserve that for content questions, as opposed to technical difficulties or something. And look, you don't have to wait to the end. As you can see, questions are already piling up. So ask questions throughout, and every 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to ask the most popular question. Now you can upvote questions. It's a new thing on Zoom by clicking on the little thumbs up underneath each of the questions. So if you have the same question as somebody else, or you really like a particular question, you want to hear it answered, you can upvote it, and that moves it to the top of the Q&A. So click that Q&A button and ask a question or upvote anytime throughout the next 3 hours. And so I'll keep doing the top question periodically, and then at the end, I'll just go down the list and see how far I can get down in answering as many as possible before the end of today's webinar. And let me just paste that in the chat box there. The webinar will go for 3 hours, 3 super quick, way too fast hours, as anyone who's done any of these webinars with me will realize. But we will be taking 2 5-minute breaks on the hour. So at 3 p.m. Eastern, and then another one at 4. Then we'll wrap up at 5. So if it's like 2:55 and you have to pee, if you just wait 5 minutes, then you won't have to miss out on anything. So let me just paste those reminders once again into the chat box. All right, let me just check in to make sure there wasn't any kind of major onboarding problems. Apparently not. It looks like we have over 3,000 webinar participants. How cool is that? Oh, and importantly, don't worry about taking notes or anything. After the webinar is over, we are not only going to send you a full recording of the whole thing, but also a free link to download all the videos that I'm going to feature in high def, so you can see them in all their full resolution glory. So if just because of the bandwidth, things look a little fuzzy, don't worry, you're going to get all the high-res videos at the end. Are you ready to rock? Or I have my lucky broccoli tie today. So are you ready to brock? Looks good enough to eat. All right, let us start with caloric restriction, calorie restriction. How many calories do you have to restrict to lose a pound of body fat, right? If you're like me, you learned in medical school that 1 pound of fat equals 3,500 calories. But as the title of this first video spells out, the 3,500 calorie per pound rule is wrong. Let's look at that now. Okay.
The first surgical attempt at body sculpting was in 1921, with a dancer wanting to improve the shape of her ankles. The surgeon apparently scraped away too much tissue and tied the stitches too tight, resulting in necrosis, amputation, and the first recorded malpractice suit in the history of plastic surgery. Today's liposuction is much safer, only killing about 1 in 5,000 patients, mostly from unknown causes, throwing a clot off into your lung or perforations of your internal organs. Liposuction currently reigns as the most popular cosmetic surgery in the world, and its effects are indeed only cosmetic. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine assessed obese women before and after having about 20 pounds of fat sucked out of their bodies, resulting in nearly a 20% drop in their total body fat. Normally, lose even just 5 to 10% of your body weight in fat, and you get significant improvements in blood pressure, blood sugars, inflammation, cholesterol, and triglycerides. But liposuction sucks. None of those benefits materialized even after the massive liposuction. This suggests subcutaneous fat, the fat under our skin, is not the problem. The metabolic insults of obesity arise from the visceral fat, the fat surrounding or even infiltrating our internal organs, like the fat marbling our muscles and liver. The way you lose that fat, the dangerous fat, is to take in fewer calories than you burn. Anyone who's seen the Biggest Loser shows knows with enough calorie restriction and exercise, hundreds of pounds can be lost. Similarly, there are cases in the medical literature of what some refer to as super-obesity, in which individuals lost up to 374 pounds largely on their own, without professional help, and kept it off for years. The guy lost about 20 pounds a month, cycling 2 hours a day and reducing intake to 800 calories a day, which is down around what some prisoners were getting at concentration camps in World War II. Perhaps America's most celebrated TV weight loss was when Oprah pulled out a wagon full of fat representing the 67 pounds she lost on a very low-calorie diet. How many calories did she have to cut to achieve that within 4 months? Consult leading nutrition textbooks, or refer to trusted authorities like the Mayo Clinic, and you'll learn the simple weight loss rule. 1 pound of fat is equal to 3,500 calories. Quoting from the Journal of the American Medical Association, a total of 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of body weight. This means if you decrease your intake by 500 calories daily, you will lose 1 pound per week. 500 calories per day times 7 days equals 3,500 calories, so 1 pound of body fat. The simple weight loss rule, that's simply not true. The 3,500 calorie rule can be traced back to a paper in 1958 that just noted that since fatty tissue on the human body is 87% fat, a pound of body fat would have about 395 grams of pure fat. Multiply that by 9 calories per gram of fat gives you that 3,500 calories per pound approximation. The fatal flaw that leads to dramatically exaggerated weight loss predictions is that the 3,500 rule fails to take into account the fact that changes in the calories inside of the energy balance equation automatically lead to changes in calories out. For example, the slowing of metabolic rate that accompanies weight loss, known as metabolic adaptation. That's one of the reasons weight loss plateaus. For example, imagine a 30-year-old sedentary woman of average height who weighs 150 pounds. According to the 3,500 calorie rule, if she cuts 500 calories out of her daily diet, she'd lose a pound a week, or 52 pounds a year. In 3 years, then, she would vanish. She'd go from 150 pounds to -6. Obviously, that doesn't happen. What would happen is that in the first year, instead of losing 52 pounds, she'd likely lose only 32 pounds, and then, after a total of 3 years, stabilize at about 100 pounds. This is because it takes fewer calories to exist as a thin person. Part of it is simple mechanics. In the same way a Hummer requires more fuel than a compact car, think how much more effort it would take to just get out of a chair, walk across the room, or climb a few stairs carrying a 50-pound backpack. That's no lighter than carrying 50 pounds in the front. Even when you're lying at rest sound asleep, there's simply less of your body to maintain as we lose weight. Every pound of fat tissue lost may mean one less mile of blood vessels your body has to pump blood through every minute. So the basic upkeep and movement of thinner bodies takes fewer calories. So as you lose weight by eating less, you end up needing less. That's what the 3,500 calorie rule doesn't take into account. Or imagine it the other way. A 200-pound man starts eating 500 more calories a day. That's like a large soda or 2 donuts. According to the 3,500 calories rule, in 10 years, he'd weigh more than 700 pounds. That doesn't happen because the heavier he is, the more calories he burns just existing. If you're 100 pounds overweight, that's like the skinny person inside you trying to walk around balancing 13 gallons of oil at all times, or lugging around a sack containing 400 sticks of butter wherever you go. It takes about 2 donuts worth of extra energy just to live at 250 pounds, and so that's where he'd plateau out if he kept it up. So weight gain or weight loss given a certain calorie excess or deficit is a curve that flattens out over time rather than a straight line up or down. Nevertheless, the 3,500 calorie rule continues to crop up, even in obesity journals. Public health researchers used it to calculate how many pounds children might lose every year if, for example, fast food kids' meals swapped in apple slices instead of French fries. They figured 2 meals a week could add up to about 4 pounds a year. The actual difference, National Restaurant Association-funded researchers were no doubt delighted to point out, would probably add less than half a pound, 10 times less than the 3,500 calorie rule would predict. The original article was subsequently retracted.
All right, I hope that was clear, right? Because it takes more calories just to exist as a heavier person, right, and fewer calories to just live and walk around as a skinnier person. For any given calorie excess or deficit, it's a curve that flattens out over time rather than a straight line up or down. So you can see how if you went on a diet and your weight loss would then plateau. But if you look at the math, it would take 3 years for that to happen. You say, wait a second, weight loss tends to stall on a new diet, within 6 months or so. So there's obviously something else going on, and that is what we will cover next after I answer the first question. Bunches of questions through here, so you should try to give yourself a time to go through and upvote any ones that you find particularly interesting. I think some of these just got in early, and so had a lot of chance to get upvoted. Number one on the list is, can medication be ingested during fasting hours like antibiotics, blood pressure medications, or vitamin D3? Some medications should only be taken on a full stomach, and that should be in the prescription insert you get. Ideally, both a pharmacist and your medical professional should tell you which is which. Vitamin D3 can be taken on an empty stomach, but is absorbed better on not just a full stomach, but the fullest stomach. So the largest meal of the day, if you want to maximize absorption, vitamin D3, and I do indeed have a video on that. I have some video coming up on Nutrition Facts on chronobiology, talking about our circadian rhythms that suggest taking blood pressure medications at night more effective than taking them in the morning. And when do doctors tell people to take their blood pressure medications? In the morning, and that's not a good idea. I will be briefly talking about this in my risks of fasting video coming up later in this very webinar, talking about the effects on drug metabolism of fasting with its both pros and cons. All right, so let us go back to the next video, which is entitled "The Reason Weight Loss Plateaus When You Diet." And then after the video, we'll get back to questions.
We have millions of years of evolution hardwiring us to survive scarcity. Compensatory survival mechanisms our body uses to defend against weight loss. So when we start losing weight, we may unconsciously start moving less as a behavioral adaptation to conserve energy. There are metabolic adaptations as well. Our metabolism slows down. Every pound of weight loss may reduce our resting metabolic rate by 7 calories a day. This may only translate to a few percent differences for most, but can rapidly snowball for those who achieve massive weight loss. During one session, some of the Biggest Loser contestants famously had their metabolic rates tracked. Above and beyond the hundreds of calories less it takes to just exist 100+ pounds lighter, by the end of the season their metabolic rate slowed by an extra 500 calories a day. The mind blower was that 6 years later they were retested and still had the 500 calorie a day handicap. So the contestants had to cut 500 calories more than anyone else their size to maintain the same weight loss. No wonder the bulk of their weight was regained. Most remained at least 10% lower than their starting weight, though, and even a 7% drop has been shown to cut diabetes rates about in half. Still, the metabolic slowing means you have to work that much harder than everyone else just to stay in place. Analyzing 4 seasons of The Biggest Loser minute by minute, researchers noted that 85% of the focus was on exercise rather than diet, though the exercise component accounted for less than half of the weight loss. Even 6 years after their season ended, the contestants had been maintaining an hour of daily, vigorous exercise, yet still regained most of the weight. Why? Because they started eating more. They could have cut their exercise to just 20 minutes a day and still maintained 100% of their initial weight loss if they would have just been able to keep their intake to under 3,000 calories a day. That may not sound like much of a challenge, but weight loss doesn't just slow your metabolism, it boosts your appetite. If it were just a matter of your weight settling at the point at which your reduced calorie intake matches your reduced calorie output, it would take years for your weight loss to plateau. Instead, it often happens within 6 to 8 months. You may know the drill. Start the diet, stick to the diet, and then weight loss stalls 6 months later. What happened? Don't blame your metabolism. It just plays a small part. What happened is that you likely actually stopped sticking to your diet because your appetite went on a rampage. Let's break it down. If you cut 800 calories out of your daily diet, 2,600 calories a day down to 1,800, and your weight loss stalls after 6 months, then what happened is that at the end of the first month, you think you're still cutting 800 calories, but you may actually only be down about 600 calories a day. By month 2, you're only down about 500, month 3, 300, and by month 6, you're only eating 200 calories less than before you went on the diet. In other words, you inadvertently suffered an exponential increase in calorie intake over those 6 months. Yet you may not even realize it, because by that time your body may have ramped your appetite up 600 calories, so it still feels as though you're eating 800 calories less, but it's actually only 200. Since an 800-calorie drop in intake may slow your metabolism and physical activity about 200 calories a day, with no difference between calories in and calories out at 6 months, no wonder your weight loss grinds to a complete halt. The slow upward drift in calorie intake on a new diet is not because you got lazy. Once your appetite is boosted by 600 calories after dieting for a while, eating 200 calories less at the end is as hard as eating 800 calories less at the beginning. So you can maintain the same disciplined level of willpower and self-control and still end up stagnating. To prevent this from happening, you need to maintain the calorie deficit. How is that possible in the face of a ravenous appetite? Hunger is a biological drive. Asking someone to eat smaller portions is like asking someone to take fewer breaths. You can white-knuckle it for a bit, but eventually nature wins out. That's why I wrote How Not to Diet. There are foods that can counter the slowing of our metabolism and suppress our appetite. Ways of eating to counter the behavioral adaptation and even eat more food, yet still lose weight. Due to the metabolic slowing and increased appetite that accompanies weight loss, sustained weight loss requires a persistent calorie deficit of 300 to 500 calories a day. This can be accomplished without reducing portion sizes, simply by lowering the calorie density of meals. This can result in the rare combination of weight loss with both an increase in quality and even quantity of food consumed. I'm going to do a whole series of videos about it. The bottom line is that sustainable weight loss is not about eating less food, it's about eating better food.
All right, I am back. Now I'm really back. Okay, so the main reason weight loss stalls on a diet is not because your metabolism slows down, but because you're no longer on the diet. It feels as though you're still on the diet, right? You're working just as hard as before, but your body revved up your appetite, so it seems like you're cutting back just as much as when you started. But if someone actually counted up your calories, it's just not true. That's why it's so incredibly hard to lose weight sustainably with portion control, just cutting down on the amount of foods you eat. Given this effect, how many calories do you really have to cut out of your daily diet to lose a pound? That is what we're going to cover next, after going back to our questions. There are over 120 questions. So I feel like we should, maybe during the break, well, certainly during the first break, which is coming up in about a half an hour, anyone wants to go through and look at all the questions and see, maybe there's some really juicy ones stuck down at the bottom that you want to upvote to make sure they see the light of day. That might be a good use of your time. Sorry, we're burning through all this quickly, but there's just so much good information to get through. The top question I have on my list here is, does drinking tea or coffee during the fasting period affect the benefits of intermittent fasting? What about herbal teas? And so as you'll see, when I actually get into the intermittent fasting, you'll see that there does not appear to be much of a difference in outcomes, whether you're doing straight fasting or what's called modified fasting, where people are actually taking in a few hundred calories, as much as a few hundred calories on their fasting days. So some studies I'll mention, gave people a few packets of oatmeal. Other people said all you can eat above ground vegetables because there's so few calories. Others get like vegetable soups and things like that. And there does not seem to be much of a difference, as we'll get down to that, where you're just setting up all the fasting stuff by first going through, well, how many calories do we really need to eliminate or burn to lose a certain amount of fat. Okay, and the next question, I'll just answer really quickly. What is the safest and most recommended fasting for people to do for weight loss, for health? That's what this webinar is all about. Hopefully, I will have answered that by the end of this 3 hours. But for now, let me go back. Our next video is entitled "The New Calories Per Pound of Weight Loss Rule."
If the 3,500 calories per pound weight loss rule is bunk, what's the alternative? How many fewer calories do you have to eat, or how many more do you have to burn to lose a pound of fat? There are validated mathematical models that take into account the dynamic changes that occur when you cut calories, such as the metabolic slowdown, and they've been turned into free online calculators that you can use to make personalized estimates. There's the Body Weight Planner from the National Institutes of Health, and the Pennington Biomedical Research Center's Weight Loss Predictor out of Louisiana State University. Here are the 2 direct links. Here are some shortened URLs. The NIH Body Weight Planner has been found to be more accurate since the LSU model appears to overestimate the drop in physical activity, but they both have their own pluses and minuses. The Body Weight Planner tells you how many calories you need to restrict and/or how much more exercise you need to do to achieve a specific weight loss goal by a specific date. If you click on the Switch to Expert Mode button, you can get a graph and exportable chart showing your day-to-day weight loss trajectory. So if you're a middle-aged, sedentary, average-weight woman, obese at 175 pounds, who wants to be closer to her ideal weight within a year, 2,000 calories a day would prevent future weight gain. About 1,400 calories a day would bring your weight down like this, and then you could maintain that lower weight at 1,700 calories a day. If in addition you walked a mile a day, it would give you a little more calorie leeway. The LSU weight loss predictor, on the other hand, doesn't allow you to tweak physical activity, but the advantage is that you don't have to choose a goal or time frame. Just put in different calorie changes, and it graphs out your expected course. Is there any easy rule of thumb you can use? Yes. Every permanent 10-calorie drop in daily intake will eventually lead to about 1 pound of weight loss, though it takes about a year to achieve half the total weight change, and about 3 years to completely settle into the new weight. So, cutting 500 calories a day can cause the 50-pound weight loss predicted by the 3,500 calorie rule, but that's the total weight loss at which you plateau, not an annual drop. And it takes about 3 years to get there. A 500-calorie deficit would be expected to cause about a 25-pound weight loss the first year, and then an additional 25 over years 2 and 3. That's only if you can maintain the 500-calorie deficit, though. If you're eating the same diet that led to the original weight problem, but just in smaller servings, you should expect your appetite to rev up about 45 calories per pound lost. So if you were cutting 500 calories a day through portion control alone, before you were down even a dozen pounds, you'd feel so famished that you'd be driven to eat 500 calories more a day, and your weight loss could vanish. That's why if you're dead set on eating the same diet, the same foods, but just in smaller quantities, you have to cut down an additional 45 calories per pound of desired weight loss to offset your hunger drive. So to get that 1 pound off, instead of just 10 calories less per day, using the 10 calories per pound rule, you'd have to eat 10 calories less on top of the 45 less to account for the revving of your appetite. So 45 plus 10 equals 55. So just changing diet quantity and not quality, it takes 55 calories less per day to lose a pound. So that 500-calorie daily deficit would only net you about a 9-pound weight loss over time instead of 50. That's why portion control methods can be such a frustrating failure for so many people.
All right, I am back. Let me paste those 2 links into the chat box so you have them handy. All right, there they are. It's really fun to play around with them, but bottom line, if you want to lose weight by eating the same kind of food just in smaller quantities, multiply the number of pounds you want to lose by 55, and that'll tell you how many calories you have to cut out of your daily diet. In fact, I will copy paste that in the chat box right there. If, however, you lose weight by eating better food, less calorie dense food like fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, you can end up eating fewer calories but more food, so you don't have the hunger problem, in which case it's only just 10 calories a day can result in a pound of weight loss. And I'm sure that brings up a lot of questions, so let's go to the list and see how we are doing. Up to 128 questions. All right. An anonymous attendee asked, does fasting affect hormonal balance? Kind of a broad question. It certainly affects hormone levels. In fact, that's one of the reasons. Right now, actually, I'm working on the fasting and cancer videos. And one of the hopes is that by fasting, we can drop IGF-1 levels, insulin-like growth factor 1 levels, which is a growth hormone in the body that can fuel a variety of cancers. So that would actually be a good hormonal thing, as well as dropping down insulin levels and fasting insulin levels, also associated with accelerated cancer growth. But if you're talking about like testosterone, estrogen, whatever temporarily, so it does. So by by day 2 or 3, testosterone levels drop in terms of fasting, but they should bounce back up once you start refeeding. And also affects luteinizing hormone, which is can affect woman's menstrual cycle as well. Although, yeah, there aren't any. Trying to think of any studies in terms of like infertility or ovarian dysfunction or anything. Not that I know of in terms of any studies on fasting, intermittent or otherwise, for those conditions. All right, let's go back to our videos here. So far, I've talked about calorie restriction for weight loss, but what about calorie restriction for extending your life? That's the subject of the next video, calorie restriction for longevity.
Though a bane for dieters, a slower metabolism may actually be a good thing. We've known for more than a century that calorie restriction can increase the lifespan of animals, and the metabolic slowdown may be the mechanism. That could be why the tortoise lives 10 times longer than the hare. Rabbits can live 10 to 20 years, whereas Harriet, a tortoise evidently collected from the Galapagos by none other than Charles Darwin himself in the 1830s, lived until 2006. Slow and steady may win the race. One of the ways your body lowers your resting metabolic rate is by creating cleaner-burning, more efficient mitochondria, the power plants that fuel our cells. It's like your body passes its own fuel efficiency standards. These new mitochondria create the same energy with less oxygen and produce less free radical exhaust. After all, your body is afraid famine is afoot, and so is trying to conserve as much energy as it can. The largest caloric restriction trial to date indeed found both metabolic slowing and a reduction in free radical-induced oxidative stress, both of which may slow the rate of aging. The flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. But whether this will result in greater human longevity is an unanswered question. Caloric restriction is often said to extend the lifespan of every species studied, but that isn't even true of all strains within a single species. Some scientists don't think calorie restriction will improve human longevity at all. Others suggest a 20% calorie restriction starting at age 25 and sustained 52 years could add 5 years onto your life. Either way, the reduced oxidative stress would be expected to improve our health span. Members of the Calorie Restriction Society, self-styled cronies for calorie-restricted optimal nutrition, appear to be in excellent health, but they're a rather unique, self-selected bunch of individuals. You don't really know until you put it to the test. Enter the Calorie Study, the comprehensive assessment of long-term effects of reducing intake of energy, the first clinical trial to test the effects of caloric restriction. Hundreds of non-obese men and women were randomized to 2 years of 25% calorie restriction. They only ended up achieving half that, but lost about 18 pounds and 3 inches off their waists, wiping out more than half of their visceral abdominal fat. That translated into significant improvements in cholesterol levels, triglycerides, insulin sensitivity, and blood pressures. 80% of those who were overweight when they started were normal weight by the end, compared to a 27% increase in those who became overweight in the control group. In the famous Minnesota starvation study that used conscientious objectors as guinea pigs during World War II, the study subjects suffered, both physically and psychologically, experiencing depression, irritability, and loss of libido. The subjects started out lean, though, and had their calorie intake cut in half. The calorie study ended up being 4 times less restrictive, only about 12% below baseline calorie intake, and enrolled normal weight individuals, which in the U.S. these days means overweight on average. As such, the calorie subjects experienced nothing but positive quality of life benefits, with significant improvements in mood, general health, sex drive, and sleep. They only ended up eating about 300 fewer calories than they were eating at baseline. So they got all these benefits, the physiological benefits, the psychological benefits, all from only cutting about a snack-sized bag of chips worth of calories from their daily diets. What happened at the end of the trial, though? In the Minnesota starvation study, and calorie deprivation experiments done on Army Rangers, as soon as subjects were released from restriction, they tended to rapidly regain the weight, and sometimes even more. The leaner they started out, the more their body seemed to drive them to overeat to pack back on the extra body fat. In contrast, after the completion of the calorie study, even though their metabolism was slowed, they retained about 50% of the weight loss 2 years later. They must have acquired new eating attitudes and behaviors that allowed them to keep their weight down. After extended calorie restriction, for example, cravings for sugary, fatty, and junky foods may actually go down.
All right, that is just a remarkable array of benefits: better mood, health, sex, sleep, cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure, and blood sugar control. Surely there must be some downsides, which is what my next video is about. But first, let's knock out a few of these questions. First one on the list from Reg: what is your position on 1 meal a day? That is what we call time-restricted feeding, and we have 2 videos coming up on time-restricted feeding, so we will definitely get to that. Next on the list, I see a few of these up top that I know I'm going to answer, so let me just clear those out. Anonymous attendee says, what's the most effective intermittent fasting schedule for weight and fat loss? That's I'm getting there. I'm getting to the intermittent fasting stuff, doing calorie restriction first, then full on water only fasting, then we'll do intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding. All right, next one on the list is, does it matter what, this is a great question. Does it matter what time of day I start to eat for 6 hours on an 18-hour fast? So Ken is talking about this time-restricted feeding, restricting food intake to a 6-hour window. And the question is, well, does it matter when those 6 hours is? I mean, do I skip breakfast? Do I skip supper? What's the best way to do it? And I answer that question as well, but spoiler alert, it is better to have that earlier in the day. We want to front load calories earlier in the day. So your time-restricted feeding should be early, and I'll get to exactly why that is very soon within this very webinar. And the next one on the list, does fasting benefit muscle gain? I'm going to actually be talking Well, on calorie restriction and lean body mass in this next thing. And then when I talk about the potential risks of fasting, I'm going to talk about it there as well. And then intermittent fasting, I'm going to talk about it as well. So I'm going to hit this about 4 times. And all right. So basically, most of that was just like, stay tuned, but keep asking questions, keep upvoting questions. And then I will squeeze in a few between, and at the end, we'll just go down the list. All right, so let us go back to our videos here. This one is the potential pitfalls of calorie restriction. Are you at the edge of your seat? Let's do it.
One of the most consistent benefits of calorie restriction is blood pressure improvements in as short as 1 or 2 weeks. Blood pressures can sometimes even be normalized in a matter of weeks, and blood pressure pills discontinued. Unfortunately, this can work a little too well and cause something called orthostatic intolerance, which can manifest as lightheadedness or dizziness upon standing, which in severe cases can cause fainting. Staying hydrated can help. What about loss of muscle mass? In the calorie trial, 70% of the lost body weight was fat and 30% lean body mass, so they ended up with an improved body composition. 72% lean mass compared to 66% in the control group. Though leg muscle mass and strength declined in absolute terms, relative to their new body size, they generally got stronger. Is there any way to preserve even more lean mass, though, particularly among older individuals who naturally tend to lose muscle mass with age? Increased protein intakes are commonly suggested, but most studies fail to find a beneficial effect on preserving muscle strength or function, whether you're young or old, active or sedentary. For example, researchers randomized overweight older men and women to a normal protein diet, 4 grams for every 10 pounds of body weight, or a high-protein diet, about 8 grams per 10 pounds during a 25% calorie restriction. That doubling of protein intake had no discernible effect on lean body mass, muscle strength, or physical performance. Most such studies found the same lack of benefit. But put them all together, and one can tease out a small advantage, about a pound or 2 difference over an average of 6 months. Unfortunately, high protein intakes during weight loss has been found to have profoundly negative metabolic effects, for example, undermining the benefits of weight loss on insulin sensitivity. Lose 20 pounds and you can dramatically improve your body's ability to handle blood sugars compared to a control group that maintained their weight. Lose the exact same amount of weight, but on a high-protein diet, getting about an extra 30 grams a day, and it's like you never lost any weight at all. Though you can always bulk back up after weight loss, the best way to preserve muscle mass during weight loss is exercise. The calorie study had no structured exercise component, and like after bariatric surgery, about 30% of the weight loss was lean mass. In contrast, that proportion was only about 16% in Biggest Loser contestants, chalked up to their vigorous exercise program. Resistance training, even just 3 times a week, can prevent more than 90% of lean body mass loss during calorie restriction. The same may be true of bone loss. Lose weight through calorie restriction alone, and you experience a decline in bone mineral density, and fracture risk sites such as the hip and spine. In the same study, though, those randomized to lose weight with exercise didn't suffer any bone loss. The researchers conclude our results suggest that regular exercise should be included as a part of a comprehensive weight loss program to offset the adverse effects of calorie restriction on the bone. You can never argue with calls for increased physical activity, but even without an exercise regimen, the very small drop in bone mineral density in the calorie trial might only increase a 10-year risk of osteoporotic fracture by only about 0.2%. The benefits of calorie restriction revealed by the study — improved blood pressures, improved cholesterol, improved mood, improved libido, improved sleep — would seem to far outweigh any potential risks. The fact that a reduction in calories seemed to have such wide-ranging benefits on quality of life led commentators in the AMA's Internal Medicine Journal to write, The findings of this well-designed study suggest that intake of excess calories is not only a burden to our physical equilibrium, but also to our psychological well-being as well.
Okay, so stay hydrated. High protein, bad. Exercise, good. Excess calories, bad. Let's go back to the questions. Just as a reminder, I am answering the most popular upvoted questions first. And so if you want to ask a question, it may be useful to scroll through and make sure your question hasn't already been answered. If you ask the same question that someone else did, we are going to dismiss it just so if there's duplicates. So I know there's not much time to really scroll through questions because you want to get all the information, but we're trying to make it as info-packed as possible. And I should be able to go through a bunch of these quickly. Okay, starting at the top once again. Cecilia asks, can you lose weight while intermittent fasting if you don't reduce your calories? That is the critical question that is going to be answered in my intermittent fasting section. I mean, that was the whole point. So they did these head-to-head studies where you have the exact same calorie restriction, but intermittently or chronically, what happens differently? More weight loss, less weight loss, side effects, no side effects, what's going to happen? That's what we're going to get to. So stay tuned. Same bat channel, same bat time. What is your take on, so Deckel asks, what's your take on the type of fast they do at True North? Prolonged up to 40 days of water fasting. That's actually the topic of my very next video. So why don't we actually do that now? So we're moving from calorie restriction to total calorie restriction. Fasting for weight loss is put to the test.
I talked about the benefits of calorie restriction. Well, the greatest caloric restriction is no calories at all. Fasting has been branded the next big weight loss fad, but has a long history throughout various spiritual traditions practiced by Moses, Jesus, Mohammed, and Buddha. In 1732, a noted physician wrote, "He that eats till he is sick must fast till he is well." Today, about 1 in 7 American adults report taking that advice, using some sort of fasting as a means to control body weight. Case reports of the treatment of obesity through fasting date back more than a century in the medical literature. In 1915, 2 Harvard docs indelicately described 2 extraordinarily fat women, one of whom was a, quote, veritable pork barrel. Their success led them to conclude that, quote, moderate periods of starvation constitute a perfectly safe, harmless, and effective method for reducing the weight of those suffering from obesity, unquote. The largest recorded fast, published in 1973, made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. To reach his ideal body weight, a 27-year-old man fasted for 382 days straight, losing 276 pounds, and managed to keep nearly all of it off. He was given vitamin and mineral supplements so he wouldn't die, but no calories for more than a year. In their acknowledgments, the researchers thanked him for his cheerful cooperation and steadfast application to the task of achieving a normal physique. A U.S. Air Force study of about 20 individuals, at least 100 pounds overweight, most unable to lose weight on previous diets, were fasted for as long as 84 days. 9 dropped out of the study, but the 16 who remained were unequivocally successful at losing between 40 and 100 pounds. In the first few days, subjects were noted losing as much as 4 pounds a day. That was mostly water weight as the body starts to adapt, but after a few weeks they were steadily losing about a pound of mostly straight fat a day. The investigator described their starvation program as a dramatic and exciting treatment for obesity. Of course, the single most successful diet for weight loss, namely no diet at all, is also the single least sustainable. What other diet can cure morbid obesity in a matter of months, but practically be guaranteed to kill you within a year if you stick with it? The reason diets don't work almost by definition is that people go on them, and then they go off of them. Permanent weight loss is only achieved through permanent lifestyle change. So what's the point of fasting if you're just going to go back to your regular diet and gain it all right back? Fasting proponents cite the psychological benefit of realigning people's perceptions and motivation. Some individuals have resigned themselves to the belief that weight loss for them is somehow impossible. They may think they're just made differently in some way, and no matter what they do, the pounds don't come off. But the rapid, unequivocal weight loss during fasting demonstrates to them that with a large enough change in eating habits, it's not just possible, but inevitable. This morale boost may then embolden them to make better food choices once they resume eating. The break from food may allow some an opportunity to pause and reflect on the role food is playing in their lives, not only the power it has over them, but the power they have over it. In a fasting study entitled Correction and Control of Intractable Obesity, a person's personality was described as changing from one of desperation with abandonment of hope to that of an eager extrovert full of plans for a promising future. She realized that her weight was within her own power to control. They concluded this highly intellectual social worker has been returned to a full degree of exceptional usefulness. After a fast, newfound commitments to more healthful eating may be facilitated by a reduction in overall appetite reported post-fast compared to pre-fast, at least temporarily. Even during a fast, hunger may start to dissipate within 36 hours. So challenging people's delusions about their exceptionality to the laws of physics with a period of total fasting may seem barbaric, but in reality this method of weight reduction is remarkably well tolerated by obese patients. That seems to be a recurring theme in these published series of cases. In this influential paper, Treatment of Obesity by Total Fasting for up to 249 days, the researchers remarked that the most surprising aspect of the study was the ease with which the prolonged fast was tolerated. All their patients evidently spontaneously commented on their increased sense of well-being throughout the process, even in some cases frank euphoria. Though it's essential that fasting should only be prescribed under close medical supervision, they concluded that they were convinced that it is the treatment of choice, certainly in cases of gross obesity. Fasting for a day can make people irritable, moody, and distracted, but a few days in, many report feeling clear, elated and alert, even euphoric. This may be in part due to the significant rise in endorphins that accompanies fasting. Mood enhancement during fasting is thought to perhaps represent an adaptive survival mechanism to motivate the search for food. This positive outlook towards the future may then facilitate the behavioral change necessary to lock in some of the weight loss benefits. But is that what happens? Is it actually effective over the long term? And I'm sure you saw titles like this flash by. Is it even safe? We'll find out next.
We will indeed find out next. Oh, what just happened? Where's my video? There's my video. Yes, all right, I'm back. 382 days. Can you believe it? Before getting too excited, though, what about long-term efficacy? What about safety? That's what we're going to cover next. But first, let me go back to the question Cindy asked. Is it safe for those with diabetes to fast? And the answer, I will touch on this in the risks of fasting, but it is not safe for anyone to fast for an extended period without medical supervision, and it's even more important for anyone on medications, particularly blood sugar, medications that affect your blood sugar and that affect your electrolytes. Next question is by Abir, who asked, is intermittent fasting safe for all ages? Is it even safe for adults? We haven't even got to that yet, but we will be definitely talking about the safety of intermittent fasting. all the different varieties. Tammy Lee asks, any suggestions for improved sleep while fasting? Difficulty falling asleep while fasting, just poor quality sleep in general makes it difficult to convince myself to fast, says Tammy Lee. I don't know of any fasting specific ways to improve sleep, but there are the standard rule, but may just be more important during any kind of disruption, to practice the 4 rules of sleep hygiene. And number 1, that's exercise regularly. 2, avoid caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol before bedtime. Number 3, make your bedroom dark, cool, comfortable, and quiet. And the number 4 rule of sleep hygiene is establish a relaxing bedtime routine. Do those 4 things and that will help. You can also follow the 4 rules of sleep conditioning. What I'm actually reading out of is my chapter from How Not to Diet, which will be out in December. I have a whole chapter about sleep, sleep enhancement for accelerating weight loss. There's also 4 rules of sleep conditioning. Number 1 is go to bed only when you're sleeping. Number 2, only use the bed for sleep and sex. No reading, eating, or screen time in bed, because you want to associate your brain, you want to associate sleep in bed with inside your brain. Number 3, if you can't fall asleep within 15 or 20 minutes or so, get up, leave the bedroom, and then only go back when you are sleepy again. Repeat as necessary. And finally, get up at the same time every morning, no matter how little sleep that you have had. Those are the 4 rules of sleep conditioning. These are in general for people having problems sleeping. Presumably, it should help in a fasting context as well. All right. So let me now go back here. I know I left it like a cliffhanger. And so next up, how effective is, we're going to do effective first. How effective is fasting for weight loss in both the short term and in the long term? And then we'll turn over to safety. But efficacy first.
Fasting obviously causes consistent, dramatic weight loss, but how do fasted individuals do long-term? Some research groups reported extremely disappointing results. Here's what they saw. Average subjects started out at about 270 pounds, and in the 6 months before the fast continued to gain weight, as obese persons tend to do. Then after 24 days of what they called inpatient starvation, a dramatic 27-pound weight loss. Then what do you think happened? They gained it all back, and more. Though one could argue if they had not fasted, they might have been up around here at that point. In another study with follow-ups ranging up to 50 months, only 4 out of 25 so-called super-obese patients achieved even partial sustained success. Based on these kinds of data, some investigators concluded that complete starvation is of no value in the long-term treatment of obese patients. Other research teams reported better outcomes. One series of about 100 individuals found that 60% either retained at least some weight loss at follow-up or even continued losing. The follow-up periods varied from 1 to 32 months with no breakdown as to who fasted how long, though making the data hard to interpret. 1 year after fasting 62 patients down 16 pounds in 10 days in another study, 40% retained at least 7 pounds of that weight loss. Put 6 such studies together, and hundreds of obese subjects fasted for an average of 44 days, lost an average of 52 pounds, and around 1 or 2 years later, 40% retained at least some of that weight loss. So most gained all their weight back, but 40% is extraordinary for a weight loss study. Follow 100 obese individuals getting treated at a weight loss clinic with a standard, low-calorie diet, and researchers found only 1 out of 100 lost more than 40 pounds, only about 1 in 10 even lost 20 pounds, with the overall successful weight maintenance at only 2% over 2 years. That's why having a control group is so important. What may look like a general failure may actually be a relative success compared to more traditional weight loss techniques. Researchers new to the field may find it clearly disappointing that a year later 2/3 were failures, with more than a third regaining all their weight they had initially lost, but 12% were labeled successes, maintaining 59 pounds of weight loss 2 years later. They lost massive amounts of excess weight and kept it off. In a direct comparison of different weight loss approaches at the same clinic, 5 years after initiating a conventional low-calorie approach, only about 1 in 5 was down 20 pounds, compared to nearly half in the group who instead had undergone a few weeks of fasting years previously. By year 7, most of those instructed on daily caloric restriction were back to or had exceeded their original weight, but that was only true of about 1 in 10 of the fasted group. In an influential paper in the New England Journal of Medicine on 7 myths about obesity, fallacy number 3 was that large, rapid weight loss is associated with poorer long-term weight loss outcomes as compared with slow, gradual weight loss. In reality, the opposite is true. The hare may end up skinnier than the turtle. Researchers set up a study comparing the sustainability of weight loss at 3 different speeds: 6 days of fasting, versus 3 weeks of a very low-calorie diet, 600 calories a day, or 6 weeks of a low-calorie diet, 1,200 calories a day. The question is, what happened a year later? A year later, the fasting group was the only one that sustained a significant loss of weight. That was just 1 year, though. How about 9 years later? This is the largest, longest follow-up study I could find. At least some of the fast-induced weight losses were maintained a year later by the great majority. A year later, 90% remained lighter than they started out. But then 2 years later, 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, and by 9 years later, that number dropped to fewer than 1 in 10. By then, almost everyone had regained the weight they had initially fasted away. Many patients reported they thought the temporary loss was worth it, though. As a group, they lost an average about 60 pounds. They described improved health and quality of life, claiming re-employment was facilitated and earnings increased during that period of time. But the fasting didn't appear to result in any permanent change in eating habits for the vast majority. The small minority for which fasting led to sustainable weight loss all admit to a radical change in previous eating habits. Fasting only works long-term if it can act as a jumpstart to a healthier diet. In a retrospective long-term comparison of weight reduction after an inpatient stay at a naturopathic center, those who were fasted lost more weight at the time, but at around 7 years were back to the same weight. No surprise, since they reported returning to the same diet they were on before. Those who were instead placed on a healthier, more whole-food, plant-based diet were more likely to make persistent changes in their diet, and 7 years later were lighter than when they started. Why can't you have it both ways, though? You could use fasting to kickstart a big drop and then start a healthier diet. The problem is that big drop is largely illusory. Fasting for a week or two can cause more weight loss than calorie restriction, but paradoxically it may actually lead to less loss of body fat. Wait, how can eating fewer calories lead to less fat loss? Because during fasting, your body starts cannibalizing itself and burning more of your own protein for fuel. Emperor penguins, elephant seals, and hibernating bears can survive just burning fat without dipping into their muscles, but our voracious big brains appear to need at least a trickle of blood sugar, and if we're not eating any carbohydrates, our body is forced to start turning our protein into sugar to burn. Even just a few grams of carbs, like people who add honey to their water when they fast, can cut protein loss up to 50%. What about adding exercise to prevent loss of lean tissues during a fast? It may make it worse. At rest, most of your heart and muscle energy needs can be met with fat. But if you start exercising, they start grabbing some of the blood sugar meant for your brain, and your body may have to break down even more protein. Less than half of the weight loss during the first few weeks of fasting ends up coming from your fat stores. So even if you double your daily weight loss on a fast, you may actually be losing less body fat. An NIH-funded study placed obese individuals on an 800-calorie-a-day diet for 2 weeks, and they steadily lost about a half a pound of body fat a day. Then they switched them to about 2 weeks of 0 calories, and they started losing more protein and water, but on average only lost a few ounces of fat a day. When they were subsequently switched back to the initial 800 calories a day for a week, they rapidly replaced the protein and water, and so the scale registered their weight going up. But their body fat loss accelerated back to the approximate half-pound a day. The scale made it look as though they were doing better when they were completely fasting, but the reality is that they were doing worse. So during the 5-week experiment, they would have lost even more body fat sticking to their calorie-restricted diet than completely stopping eating in the middle. They would have lost more body fat eating more calories. Fasting for a week or two can interfere with the loss of body fat rather than accelerate it.
All right, so fasting only works long-term if it can act as a jump start to a healthier diet, and just doing it for a week or two is like the keto diet. It actually slows body fat loss rather than accelerating it. But is it safe to fast longer than that? Fasting safety is next, but it is time for a break. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up a 5-minute countdown timer, and in that time, if you're able, go through the list of questions, upvote any that you find useful, and the first thing we'll do when we get back from the break is I'll go through a few of the top questions. All right, we are back in business here. Back to the program. Let's see what questions we have here. First question asked by Clint is, what does intermittent fasting, how does it affect your gut bacteria? Unfortunately, all we have are non-human animal studies. It has not been something that has been put to the test in humans. And since I'm not a veterinarian, that I am less interested in such. But if there's any good research that comes out, I'll do videos about it. Anonymous attendee asks, does eating the same amount of calories throughout the whole day the same as eating those same calories within a smaller window of time? That is what my time-restricted feeding videos are going to be about towards the end of the webinar. But spoiler alert, it is not the same. There's actually a benefit to time-restricted feeding, to not eating around the clock. But you will hear much more about that very soon within this very webinar. Let me do one more before getting back to the program. Barbara asks about intermittent fasting for people with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune thyroid condition. She has read that I'll try to paraphrase the question here. She has expressed concern that intermittent fasting or even skipping meals can lead to stress, can lead to increased cortisol output. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Are there any studies that address that particular issue? So there aren't any studies that I'm aware of on intermittent fasting and specifically Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but there are studies done on cortisol levels. What happens to cortisol levels when you fast or when you restrict your calories? Going even on a very low calorie diet, but still eating these hundreds of calories a day actually does not increase stress hormone levels, even though you'd imagine cutting down to just a few hundred calories a day would do that. So low calorie diet, very low calorie diet does not increase cortisol levels, but water only fasting does. Completely fasting does actually increase your cortisol levels. Your question is really about intermittent fasting. And the only studies that have been done on cortisol, to my knowledge, in intermittent fasting is religious fasting, Ramadan fasting, where devout Muslims for a month out of the year don't eat during the day. The difficulty extrapolating those kinds of Ramadan studies to other kind of forms of intermittent fasting is they also don't drink during the day, so no water during the day. And so there's a dehydration component, and there's all sorts of chronobiological components, circadian rhythm components, because they're indeed eating at night rather than during the day. And so it's difficult to extrapolate that to intermittent fasting. And so bottom line, there aren't any studies I'm aware of looking at cortisol levels with the kind of intermittent fasting that you are talking about. All right, let's go back. We have a series of cliffhangers here. This one is talking about how safe is water-only fasting. It's not safe unless it's medically supervised, but what is the safety of even medically supervised water-only fasting? Let's find out. Oh, what were we on? I believe we were on video 8.
Although fasting for a week or two can actually interfere with the loss of body fat, eventually, after the third week of fasting, fat loss starts to overtake the loss of lean body mass in obese individuals. But is it safe to go that long without food? Proponents speak of fasting as a cleansing process, but some of what you're purging from your body are essential vitamins and minerals. Heavy enough people can go up to 382 days without calories, but no one can go even a fraction of that long without vitamins. Scurvy, for example, is diagnosable within as few as 4 weeks without any vitamin C. Beriberi, thiamine, or vitamin B1 deficiency, may start out even earlier in fasting patients, and once manifest can result in brain damage within days, which can eventually become irreversible. Even though fasting patients report problems such as nausea and indigestion taking supplements, All the months-long fasting cases I've mentioned in the last few videos were given daily multivitamins and mineral supplementation as necessary. Without supplementation, hunger strikers and those undergoing prolonged fast for therapeutic or religious purposes, like the Baptist pastor hoping to enhance his spiritual powers for exorcism, have ended up paralyzed, comatose, or worse. Nutrient deficiencies aren't the only risk. Reading about all the successful reports of massive weight loss from prolonged fasting in the medical literature, one doctor decided to give it a try with his patients. Of the first dozen he tried it on, though, 2 died. Now, in retrospect, both of the 2 patients that died started out with heart failure and were on diuretics. Fasting itself produces a pronounced diuresis, meaning loss of water and electrolytes through the urine, and so was the combination of fasting on top of the water pills that likely depleted their potassium and triggered their fatal heart rhythms. The doctor went out of his way to point out that both of those who died started out in severe heart failure, and both had improved greatly while undergoing starvation therapy. Small consolation, since they were both dead within a matter of weeks. Not all therapeutic fasting fatalities were complicated by concurrent medication use. At first, he did very well and experienced the usual euphoria. His electrolytes remained fine, but in the middle of the 3rd week he suddenly collapsed and died. This line of treatment is certainly tempting, because it does produce weight loss, and the patient feels so much better, but the whole killing people thing must make it a very suspect line of management. Contrary to the popular notion that the heart muscle is specially spared during fasting, the heart appears to experience similar muscle wasting. This was noted in the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II in a remarkable series of detailed studies carried out by the ghetto physicians themselves before they themselves succumbed. In a case entitled Gross Fragmentation of Cardiac Fiber After Therapeutic Starvation for Obesity, a 20-year-old woman successfully achieved her ideal body weight after losing 128 pounds fasting for 30 weeks. After a breakfast of 1 egg, she had a heart attack and died. On autopsy, the muscle fibers in her heart showed evidence of widespread disintegration. The pathologist suggested that fasting regimens should no longer be recommended as a safe means of weight reduction. Breaking the fast appears to be the most dangerous part. After World War II, as many as 1 out of 5 starved Japanese prisoners of war tragically died following liberation. Now known as refeeding syndrome, multi-organ system failure can result from resuming a regular diet too quickly. See, there are critical nutrients such as thiamine and phosphorus that are used to metabolize food. So in the critical refeeding window, if too much food is taken before these nutrients can be replenished, demand may exceed supply, and whatever residual stores you still carry can be driven down even further, with potentially fatal consequences. That's why rescue workers are taught to always give thiamine before food to victims who had been trapped or otherwise unable to eat. Thiamine is responsible for the yellow color of banana bags, a term you might have heard used on medical dramas, used to describe an IV fluid concoction often given to malnourished alcoholics to prevent a similar reaction. Anyone with negligible food intake for more than 5 days may be at risk for developing refeeding problems. Medically supervised fasting has gotten much safer now that there are proper refeeding protocols. We know what warning signs to look for, and we now know who shouldn't be fasting in the first place, such as those with advanced liver, kidney failure, porphyria, uncontrolled hyperthyroidism, and pregnant and breastfeeding women. The most comprehensive safety analysis of medically supervised water-only fasting was recently published out of the True North Health Center in California. Out of 768 visits to their facility for fasts up to 41 days, were there any adverse events? Yes, 5,961 of them, but most were mild, known reactions to fasting, such as fatigue, nausea, insomnia, headache, dizziness, upset stomach, back pain. They report only 2 serious events and no fatalities. Fasting longer than 24 hours, and particularly 3 or more days, should only be done under the supervision of a physician, and preferably in a live-in clinic. In other words, don't try this at home. This is not just legalistic mumbo-jumbo. For example, normally, your kidneys dive into sodium conservation mode during fasting. But should that response break down, you could rapidly develop an electrolyte abnormality that may only manifest with nonspecific symptoms like fatigue or dizziness, which could easily be dismissed until it's too late. The risks of any therapy must be premised on the severity of the disease. The consequences of obesity are considered so serious that effective therapies could have considerable acceptable toxicity. For example, many consider major surgery for obesity to be a justifiable risk. But the key word is effective. Therapeutic fasting for obesity has been largely abandoned by the medical community, not only because of its uncertain safety profile, but its questionable short-term and long-term efficacy. Remember, for a fast that only lasts a week or two, you might be able to lose as much body fat or even more on a low-calorie diet than a no-calorie diet.
Okay, so not without downsides or risk, but that can be said about almost any therapy, right? Why might one be able to get some of the benefits without the risks by practicing intermittent fasting? That's what we're going to explore throughout the rest of the webinar, intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. But before we get to that, let's knock off a few questions. We're up to 166 questions. The first one is from Laszlo, who asks, how many hours are necessary to achieve autophagy? What is that? I'm impressed that I got so many upvotes for people obviously know what autophagy is. Autophagy is like spring cleaning for your cells. It's a decluttering. Normally, if you're kind of in excess of nutrition all the time, if there's some damaged, misfolded proteins or something, your cells just kind of toss it to the corner. But if all of a sudden you start fasting, and your body's like, whoa, I'm not going to get calories or protein anytime soon, then it starts rummaging through the corners and being like, oh, I will eat up this misfolded protein, this dysfunctional little bit, and break it down and then kind of reuse it. And so that's so suggested as one of the benefits of fasting is this triggering of this autophagy, which means like auto means self, phagy, it means like eating. So it's like eating yourself, but just the bad parts, at least at the beginning. And that may be one of the reasons why, a reason for some of the benefits of fasting. So the question was, how many hours are necessary? And you can get indicators, positive indicators of autophagy within 24 to 72 hours of fasting. Next question from Adriana. Does intermittent fasting really help with neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease? There has never been a single study on Alzheimer's or any neurodegenerative disease or dementia with intermittent fasting, and that is too bad. I wish there was. I would do videos about it. Daniel Lynch says, when fasting, should you replenish electrolytes? If so, specifically, which are needed and how much? Was you wouldn't know. So as I talked about a little bit at the end of this last video, you don't know unless you're actually tested. So that's why medically supervised fasting, what they do is they can actually measure the electrolytes, which are things like, sodium, potassium in your blood, in your urine, frequently, so that they can detect serious electrolyte abnormalities before they cause problems, because the symptoms are so, so non-specific that you can get into really serious problems, such as a fatal heart rhythm, before you even really know what's going on. So that's why it's important to have it checked. The only way you can really do that is being in some kind of facility where they can monitor your electrolytes closely. All right, let's move on to intermittent fasting, then we'll get on to some more questions. All right, so now let's cover all the major types of intermittent fasting, starting with alternate day fasting, which finally was put to the test.
Rather than cutting calories day in and day out, what if you instead just ate as much as you wanted every other day, or for only a few hours a day, or fasted 2 days a week, or 5 days a month? These are all examples of intermittent fasting regimens. That may even be the way we were built. 3 meals a day may be a relatively novel behavior for our species. For millennia, our ancestors may have only consumed only one large meal a day, or went several days at a time without food. Intermittent fasting is often presented as a means of stressing your body in a good way. There's a concept in biology called hormesis, which can be thought of as the that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger principle. Exercise is the classic example where you put stress on your heart and muscles, and as long as there's sufficient recovery time, you are all the healthier for it. Is that the case with intermittent fasting? Mark Twain thought it was. A little starvation can do more for the average sick man than can the best medicines and the best doctors. Not just a restricted diet, but total abstention from food for 1 or 2 days. But Twain also said, many a small thing has been made large by the right kind of advertising. Is the craze over intermittent fasting just hype? Many diet fads have their roots in legitimate science, but over time, facts can get distorted, benefits exaggerated, and risks downplayed. In other words, science takes a backseat to marketing. At the same time, you don't want to lose out on any potential benefit by dismissing something out of hand based on the absurdist claims of overzealous promoters. You don't want to throw the baby out with the baby fat. Religious fasting is the most studied form of intermittent fasting, specifically Ramadan, a month-long period in which devout Muslims abstain from food and drink from sunrise to sunset. The effects are complicated by a change in sleeping patterns and also thirst. The same dehydration issues arises with Yom Kippur, when observant Jews stop eating and drinking for about 25 hours. The most studied form of intermittent fasting that deals only with food restriction is alternate day fasting, which involves eating every other day, alternating with days consuming little or no calories. At rest, we burn about a 50-50 mix of carbs and fat, but we usually run out of our glycogen, or our carbohydrate stores, within 12 and 36 hours of stopping eating. At that point, our body has to shift to rely more on our fat stores. This metabolic switch may help explain why the greatest rate of breakdown and burning of fat over a 3-day fast happens between the hours of 18 and 24 of the 72-hour period. The hope is to reap some of the benefits of taking a break from eating without the risks of prolonged fasting. One of the potential benefits of alternate day fasting over chronic calorie restriction is that you get regular breaks from feeling constant hunger. But might people become so famished on their fasting day that they turn the next into a feasting day and overeat? If you ate more than twice as much as you normally would, then that presumably would defeat the whole point of alternate day fasting. Mice fed every other day don't lose weight. They just eat roughly twice as much in one day that non-fasted mice would regularly eat in 2. That is not, however, what happens in people. Randomized to fast from 8 p.m. the night before to 8 a.m. the next day, fasting for 36 hours only led to people eating an average of 20% more the day after they broke the fast, compared to a control group that didn't fast at all. That would leave them with a large calorie deficit, equivalent to a daily calorie restriction of nearly 1,000 calories a day. This particular study involved lean men and women, but similar results have been found amongst overweight or obese subjects, typically only about a 10 to 25% compensatory increase in calorie intake over baseline on non-fasting days. And this seems to be the case whether the fasting day was a true zero-calorie fast or a few hundred-calorie so-called modified fast day, which may lead to better compliance. Some studies found study subjects appeared to eat no more or even less on days after a day-long mini-fast. Even within studies, great variability is reported. In a 24-hour fasting study where folks ate an early dinner and then had a late dinner the next day after skipping breakfast and lunch, The degree of compensation at the second dinner ranged from 7% to 110%. This means some got so hungry by the time supper rolled around that they ate more than 24 hours worth of calories in a single meal. The researchers suggested that perhaps people first try test fasts to see how much their hunger and subsequent intake ramps up before considering an intermittent fasting regimen. Hunger levels can change over time, though, dissipating as your body habituates to the new normal. In an 8-week study in which obese subjects were restricted to about 500 calories every other day, after approximately 2 weeks, they reportedly started feeling very little hunger on their slashed-calorie days. This no doubt helped them lose about a dozen pounds on average over the duration of the study, but there was no control group with which to compare. A similar study with a control group found a similar amount of weight loss, about 10 pounds over 12 weeks in a group of normal weight, meaning overweight on average, individuals. For these modified regimens, where people are getting prescribed 500 calories on their quote-unquote fasting days, researchers found that from a weight loss perspective, it did not appear to matter whether those calories are divided up throughout the day or eaten in a single meal. Instead of prescribing a set number of calories on fasting days, which many people find difficult to calculate outside of a study setting, a pair of Iranian researchers instead came upon a brilliant idea of unlimited above-ground vegetables. Starchy root vegetables are relatively calorie-dense compared to other vegetables, but vegetables that grow above the ground, including stem vegetables like celery and rhubarb, flowering vegetables like cauliflower, leafy vegetables like, well, leafy vegetables, and then all the fruits we tend to think of as vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, okra, eggplant, string beans, summer squash, zucchini. So instead of just prescribing a certain number of calories for their fasting days, subjects alternated between their regular diet and helping themselves every other day to an all-you-can-eat above-ground vegetable feast, along with naturally non-caloric beverages like green tea or black coffee. After 8 weeks, subjects lost an average of 13 pounds and 2 inches off their waist. The same variability discovered for calorie compensation has also been found for weight loss, though. In a 12-month trial in which subjects were instructed to eat only 1/4 of their calorie needs every other day, weight changes varied from a loss of about 37 pounds to a gain of about 8 pounds. The biggest factor differentiating the low weight loss group from the high weight loss group appeared to be not how much they feasted on their regular diet days, but how much they were able to comply on their fast days with the calorie restriction. Overall, 10 out of 10 alternate day fasting studies showed significant reductions in body fat. Small short-term studies show about a 4 to 8% drop in body weight after 3 to 12 weeks. How does that compare with continuous calorie restriction? 0-calorie alternate day fasting was compared head-to-head to a daily 400-calorie restriction for 8 weeks. Both groups lost the same amount of weight, about 17 pounds, and in the follow-up check-in 6 months later, after the trial ended, both groups had maintained a similar degree of weight loss, still both down about a dozen pounds. The hope that intermittent fasting would somehow avoid the metabolic adaptations that slow weight loss or improve compliance don't seem to have materialized. The same compensatory reactions in terms of increased appetite and a slower metabolism plague both continuous and intermittent caloric restriction, and the largest, longest trial of alternate day fasting found that may even be less sustainable than more traditional approaches. By the end of the year, the dropout rate of the alternate day fasting group was 38%, compared to 29% in the continuous calorie restriction group. Though to date, alternate day fasting regimens haven't been shown to produce superior weight loss, for the individuals that may prefer this pattern of calorie restriction, are there any downsides? We'll find out next.
All right. Wow, that was a long one, packed. All sorts of good stuff. So bottom line, does not appear to provide an edge over traditional calorie cutting. But hey, if you like it better, why not give it a try? Well, maybe you should hear my next video first, which is entitled, Is Alternate Day Intermittent Fasting Safe? But first, let's go to questions. Annie asks, I'm interested in maximizing the gut bacteria, presumably. That can aid in weight loss. I have a lot of videos about that. What does fasting do about that? Unfortunately, it's again only there are rodent studies suggesting beneficial effects to microbiome, but there haven't been human studies that would give us an insight into what fasting or intermittent fasting does for our microbiome. Unfortunately, we just don't know in people yet. Truly asks, is there scientific legitimacy to fasting mimicking diets? That, what are we? We're like 3 videos away or 2 videos away from fasting mimicking. I'm going to cover that. Do not fear. All right, so we got that one. Oh, it just bumped up to the top. Scott, as a whole food, plant-based, oil-free, vegan, in quotes, a popular claim among lifestyle docs is that, look, if you're eating lots of healthy food, then you don't need to count calories. And that is indeed the case. That's one of the points I make in my upcoming book out in December, How Not to Diet. And I touched on it just a little briefly before, talking about one of 17 criteria I've identified to create the optimal weight loss diet. One of those is calorie density. I mean, some foods are just impossible to overeat. So, for example, I use this example in the book of strawberry ice cream, where your stomach capacity is about 4 cups. So 2 pints of strawberry ice cream will fill it up and give you 2,000 calories. So it may fill your caloric limit for the entire day. Whereas to fit 2,000 calories of strawberries, actual strawberries in your stomach, it would be 44 cups of strawberries, right? That's 11 stomachfuls. As much as I love berries, I don't think I could fill my stomach to bursting 11 times a day, right? So some foods are just impossible to overeat, just not enough calories per mouthful, per cup, per pound, per stomachful to gain weight. And so that's why one doesn't have to worry about low calorie density foods, which are primarily, lowest calorie density are dark green leafy vegetables. And as I mentioned in this video about the above ground non-starchy vegetables, and also fruits, whole grains, legumes are below the 2,000 calories in 3 pounds of food, which is approximately what most Americans eat. So you can actually eat more food and still lose weight. It's a little off topic, but hey, I love talking anything weight loss because that's my brain is about with the new book. Alyssa asks, hair loss improvement with intermittent fasting or worse with intermittent fasting. Any kind of rapid weight loss can result in hair loss, but as soon as you refeed, the hair comes back. So temporary hair loss with any kind of rapid weight loss. All right, I'm trying to clear out a couple of these. Tricia asked, does intermittent fasting help cleanse the liver? If by cleanse the liver you mean get rid of excess liver fat, yes, indeed. So in terms of fatty liver disease, any kind of calorie cutting can do that, and that has beneficial effects in terms of reducing insulin resistance, the cause of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Anonymous, next on the list, says, doesn't fasting cause metabolism slowing down? It absolutely does, as does any kind of calorie cutting. Your body's not stupid. Edwin asks, is there evidence that mild ketosis will help with dementia? As some doctor asserts in their work. Well, so this is based on studies of this medicinal food product called Exona, which is about 95% caprylic acid, and found that in a small subset of patients, there appeared to be cognitive benefits. But actually, overall in the study, there actually weren't any cognitive benefits. Coconut oil hawkers point to these kind of studies to suggest that eating coconut oil may help, but coconut oil is only about 7% caprylic acid. So you can't even make that kind of comparison. All right, let us jump back into the safety of alternate day fasting. Here we go.
Are there any downsides to fasting every other day? For example, might going all day without eating impair your ability to think clearly? Surprisingly, the results appear to be equivocal. Some studies show no measurable effects, and the ones that do fail to agree on which cognitive domains are affected. Might the fasting-feasting cycles cause eating disorder-type behavior, like binging? So far, no harmful psychological effects have been found. In fact, there may actually be some benefit, though the studies that have put it to the test specifically excluded those with a documented history of eating disorders, for whom the effects may differ. What about bone health? No change in bone mineral density was noted after 6 months of alternate-day fasting, despite about 16 pounds of weight loss, which would typically result in a dip in bone mass. There were no skeletal changes noted in the control group either, however, that lost a similar amount of weight using continuous calorie restriction. The researchers suggest that this is because both groups tend to be more physically active than the average obese individuals by 1,000 or 2,000 steps a day. Proponents of intermittent fasting suggest it can better protect lean body mass, but most of the intermittent trials have employed less accurate methods of body composition analysis, whereas the majority of continuous calorie restriction trials used vastly more accurate technologies. So to date, it's not clear if there's a difference in lean mass preservation. Improvements in blood pressure and triglycerides have been noted on intermittent fasting regimens, though this is presumed to be due to the reduction in body fat, since the effect appears to be weight loss dependent. Alternate-day fasting can improve artery function too, though it does depend on what you're eating on your non-fasting day. Randomized to an alternate-day diet high in saturated fat, artery function worsened despite a 15-pound weight loss, whereas it improved as expected in the lower-fat group. The decline in artery function was presumed to be because of the pro-inflammatory nature of saturated fat. A concern has been raised about the effects of alternate-day fasting on cholesterol. After 24 hours without food, LDL cholesterol may temporarily bump up, but this is presumably just because so much fat is being released into the system by the fast. An immediate negative effect on carbohydrate tolerance may stem from the same phenomenon, the repeated elevations of free fat floating around in your bloodstream. After a few weeks, though, LDL levels start to drop as the weight comes off. However, results from the largest and longest trial of alternate-day fasting have given me pause. 100 obese men and women were randomized into one of 3 groups: alternate-day modified fasting, 25% of their baseline calories on fasting days, 125% calories on eating days; continuous daily calorie restriction, 75% of baseline, or a control group instructed to maintain their regular diet. So, for those going into the trial eating 2,000 calories a day, in the control group they would have continued to eat 2,000 calories a day. The calorie restriction group would have started at 1,500 a day every day, and the intermittent restriction group would alternate between 500 calories a day and 2,500 calories a day. With the same overall average prescribed calorie cutting in both weight loss groups, they both lost about the same amount of weight. But surprisingly, the cholesterol effects were different. In the continuous calorie restriction group, the LDL dropped as expected compared to the control group as the pounds came off. But in the alternate-day modified fasting group, they didn't. At the end of the year, the LDL cholesterol in the intermittent fasting group ended up 10% higher than the constant calorie restriction group, despite the exact same loss of body fat. Given that LDL cholesterol is a prime causal risk factor for our #1 killer, heart disease, or even the prime risk factor for our #1 killer, this strikes a significant blow against alternate-day fasting. If you do want to try it anyway, I would advise you to have your cholesterol monitored to make sure it comes down with your weight. If you're diabetic, it's critical you talk to your physician about medication adjustment for any changes in diet, including fasting, of any duration. Even with proactive medication reduction, advice to immediately break the fast should sugars drop too low, and weekly medical supervision, type 2 diabetics fasting even just 2 days a week were twice as likely to suffer from hypoglycemic episodes compared to the unfasted control group. We still don't know the best way to tweak blood sugar meds to prevent blood sugars dropping too low on fasting days. Even just fasting for a day can significantly slow the clearance of some drugs, like the blood-thinning drug Coumadin, or increase the clearance of others, like caffeine. Fasting for 36 hours can cut your caffeine buzz by 20%. So, consultation with your medical professional before fasting is an especially good idea for anyone on any kind of medication.
All right, so ambiguous cognitive, lean mass, bone effects, and with the cholesterol findings, I wouldn't suggest it for weight loss. But that's not the only thing alternate day fasting is purported to be able to do. It's purported to have a variety of health benefits. And so that's what we will look at next. But let me see if I can knock off a few questions first. Cynthia asks, I'm hoping to address how to avoid the headaches and weakness when one attempts to fast. Unfortunately, headaches and weakness are two of the most common problems associated with fasting. It's just kind of comes with the territory. I'm not aware of anything you can do other than, so water-only fasting, something might help is lots of napping and lying down and low energy stuff, keeping flat, and of course being very careful when you stand up, particularly from a sitting or lying down position because of that orthostatic hypertension, where you get really dizzy when you fall and could potentially fall over, particularly dangerous in the shower or something. You want to be very, very careful when you're fasting because of that kind of dizziness. But yeah, comes with the territory. That's why in that True North series, 5,000 adverse effects, but what the vast majority of them were what you described, things like headaches and weakness, which are just known minor side effects of fasting. All right. So Tanya is up. Tanya asks, how do you break a fast? What's the kind of good foods to introduce when you break a fast? Well, so for example, at True North, they start people, it goes through, I believe, 5 phases, where they started with fruit and vegetable juice, the first phase, and then they go to raw fruits and vegetables, of non-citrus fruits and vegetables. Then they go to raw fruits and vegetables and steamed vegetables. Then they add whole grains and soups and other things before moving to a salt, oil, sugar-free, whole food, plant-based diet. But you shouldn't need to know any of that because you should never do it on your own. You should only do it under medical supervision, prolonged fasting, and with people who are experts in it. But just as an FYI, that's the kind of progression one might expect at one of these fasting centers. Although I believe there's only one, I think it's just True North here in the US. There are a number of European fasting centers which use a kind of a modified Buchinger approach, which I'll cover in my September webinar mostly. All right. Okay, so we did that. Vanessa asks, is there a weight loss benefit to doing a fruit fast? Oh, hey, instead of just above ground vegetables every day, what about fruit every other day? Never been tested. Fruit is always a good thing, but unfortunately has never been put to the test. And finally, before going back and addressing other potential benefits of alternative day fasting, I will answer Calvin's question, which is, how does alcohol affect intermittent fasting? Not something that's been studied, but one could presume what would happen because there's no storage capacity for your body for alcohol. When you drink alcohol, your body switches from burning fat to fat and carbs to burning alcohol because it's got to get rid of it. So in that period when you're burning the alcohol instead, you'd be burning less fat. So in terms of maximizing weight loss, alcohol probably would not be a good idea. All right. Okay, let us go back. The next video is entitled, Does Intermittent Fasting Increase Human Life Expectancy? That's an exciting title. I hope you can read Spanish, or should I say, espero que puedas leer español.
Is it true that alternate day calorie restriction prolongs life? Doctors have anecdotally attributed improvements in a variety of disease states to alternate day fasting, including asthma, seasonal allergies, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, infectious diseases like toenail fungus, periodontal disease, and viral upper respiratory tract infections, neurological conditions like Tourette syndrome and Meniere's disease, atrial fibrillation, and menopause-related hot flashes. The actual effect on chronic disease, however, remains unclear. Alternate day fasting has been put to the test for asthma in overweight adults. Asthma-related symptoms and control significantly improved, as did their quality of life, including objective measurements of lung function and inflammation, significant improvements in peak airflow, significant improvements in mood and energy, but their weight improved too, about a 19-pound drop in 8 weeks, so it's hard to tease out effects specific to the fasting beyond the benefits we might expect from weight loss by any means. For the most remarkable study on alternate day fasting, you have to go back more than a half-century. The 2017 cholesterol findings were the most concerning data I could find on alternate day fasting. The most enticing was published in Spain 61 years earlier in 1956. The title of the study translates as The Hunger Diet on Alternate Days in the Nutrition of the Aged. Inspired by the data being published on life extension with calorie restriction on lab rats, researchers split 120 residents of an old-age home in Madrid into 2 groups. 60 residents continued to eat their regular diet, and the other 60 were put on an alternate-day modified fast. On the odd days of the month, they ate a 2,300-calorie regular diet, and on the even days were given only a pound of fresh fruit and a liter of milk, estimated to add up to about 900 calories. This continued for 3 years. So what happened? Over the duration of the study, 13 died in the control group, compared to only 6 in the intermittent fasting group. But those numbers were too small to be statistically significant. What was highly significant was the number of days spent hospitalized. Residents in the control group spent a total of 219 days in the infirmary, whereas the alternate day fasting group only chalked up 123 days. This is held up as solid evidence that alternate day fasting may improve one's health span and potentially even one's lifespan. But a few caveats must be considered. It's not clear how the residents were allocated to their respective groups. If instead of being randomized, healthier individuals were inadvertently placed in the intermittent fasting group, that could skew the results in their favor. Also, it appears the director of the study was also in charge of medical decisions at the home. In that role, he could have unconsciously been biased towards hospitalizing more folks in the control group. Given the progress that has been made regulating human experimentation, it's hard to imagine such a trial being run today, and so we may actually never know if such impressive findings can be replicated.
Well, wasn't that interesting? I had never even heard of that study until I started digging into the topic. Let's go to some questions here before moving on to other types of intermittent fasting. Melinda asks, can intermittent fasting cure insulin resistance, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Any kind of calorie restriction can cure non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and decrease insulin resistance that accompanies it. But as we saw, at least with alternate day fasting, for example, there appeared to be no benefit in terms of accelerating body fat loss between chronic calorie restriction and just intermittent fasting. So the calorie restriction can do it regardless of how that happens. Marie asks, what are the implications of intermittent fasting for women over 50? When in the perimenopausal period, there's a acceleration of body fat gain. And so any type of caloric restriction by any means would help with that. But as we saw, and this includes studies on postmenopausal women, there does not seem to be any kind of edge to intermittent fasting over chronic caloric restriction. Right. Yukari says, can people who are underweight but healthy still do intermittent fasting? Certainly. Can intermittent fasting affect men and women differently? In the studies that included both men and women, the outcomes appeared to be similar. All right, and then Sarah asks, perimenopausal weight gain. Same thing. Any kind of calorie cutting will help with that. There does not seem to be any kind of particular benefits to intermittent fasting over chronic caloric restriction. And Tatiana asks, what about fasting in periods and fasting in lactation? There hasn't been any studies done on fasting, intermittent or otherwise, with menstruation, but absolutely as a contraindication to fasting is lactation. Pregnant and breastfeeding women should not be fasting. All right, let's go back now. So we covered all the best science on alternate day fasting. What about all the other forms of intermittent fasting? Let's take a look.
What about instead of eating every other day, you ate 5 days a week and fasted the other 2? The available data is actually similar to that of alternate day fasting. About a dozen pounds of weight loss was reported in overweight men and women over a 6-month period, with no difference found between those on the 5-2 intermittent fasting regimen and those on a continuous 500 calories a day restriction. The largest trial to date found an 18-pound weight loss within 6 months in the 5-2 group, not significantly different from the 20 pounds lost in the continuous calorie restriction group. Weight maintenance over subsequent 6 months was also found to be no different. Though feelings of hunger may be more pronounced in the 5-2 pattern than an equivalent level of daily calorie cutting, it does not seem to lead to overeating on the non-fasting days. One might expect going 2 days without food might negatively impact mood, but no such adverse impact was noted for those fully fasting on 0 calories or sticking to just 2 packets of oatmeal on each of the fasting days, which provide about 500 calories a day. Like alternate day fasting, the 5-2 fasting pattern appeared to have inconsistent effects on cognition and lean mass preservation, and failed to live up to the popular notion that intermittent fasting would prove to be easier to adhere to than daily calorie restriction. In fact, fewer subjects on the 5-2 pattern expressed interest in continuing the diet after the study was over compared to the continuous restriction control group, attributed to quality of life issues, citing headaches, lack of energy, and the difficulty of fitting the fasting days into their weekly routine. However, there is yet to be a single 5-2 study showing elevated LDL cholesterol compared to continuous calorie restriction at 6 months or a year, offering a potential advantage over alternate day regimens. Instead of 5-2, what about 25-5, spending 5 days a month on a fasting-mimicking diet? Longevity researcher Walter Longo designed a 5-day meal plan to try to simulate the metabolic effects of fasting by being low in protein, sugars, and calories, with 0 animal protein or animal fat. By making it plant-based, he was hoping to lower the level of the cancer-promoting growth hormone IGF-1, which he indeed accomplished, along with a drop in markers of inflammation after 3 cycles of his 5 days a month program. 100 men and women were randomized to consume his fasting-mimicking diet for 5 consecutive days per month, or to maintain their regular diet the whole time. After 3 months, the FMD group, the fasting-mimicking diet group, was down about 6 pounds compared to control, with significant drops in body fat and waist circumference accompanied by a drop in blood pressures. Those who were the worst off accrued the most dramatic benefits. What's even crazier is that 3 further months after completion, some of the benefit appeared to persist, suggesting the effects may last for several months. It's unclear, though, if those randomized to the fasting mimicking diet group used it as an opportunity to make positive lifestyle changes that helped maintain some of the weight loss. Dr. Longo created a company to commercially market his meal plan, but to his credit, says he donates 100% of the profits he receives from it to charity. The whole diet appears to mostly just be a few dehydrated soup mixes, herbal teas like hibiscus and chamomile, kale chips, nut-based energy bars, an algae-based DHA supplement, and a multivitamin dusted with vegetable powder. So I figure, why spend $50 a day on a few processed snacks when you could instead eat a few hundred calories a day of real vegetables?
How interesting was that, right? So all you can eat above ground vegetables for 5 days would have that same low in protein, sugar, calories, zero animal protein, zero animal fat, but we'll probably never know if it works as well, better, or worse, since it's hard to imagine such a study ever getting done without the financial incentives that are present. Next question. Let us see what else we have here. Robin King asks, in the future, is there going to be some kind of kit or testing method for individuals to do long-term water-only fasting? I certainly hope not, because as I hoped I was trying to get across, it can be dangerous without medical supervision. Do not do it. Do not do prolonged water-only fasting without medical supervision from someone who knows what they're doing. Second part of the question, on the internet, finding all sorts of fasting mimicking diet hacks, coming up with the right calorie range, but does it, basically the question she asked, does it actually matter what kind of foods fit into that range? Can you just do like a fasting mimicking diet by eating a Twinkie or two a day? And the answer is no. We think the benefits arise from the very specific aspects. It's not just a very low-calorie diet, but a fasting mimicking diet, which not only is low in calories, but also is low in protein, sugar, and strictly plant-based. And the hope is we are going to decrease IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which may be one of the reasons why people who eat more plant-based diets tend to have lower cancer rates. All right, so we got that one. Kyle asked, any thoughts on a study, American Journal of Cardiology this year associated with skipping breakfast? Oh, where did it just go? Skipping breakfast with cardiovascular and all-cause mortality. So yeah, study, this is not the first study. Dozens of studies have shown this, associating living a significantly shorter life with skipping breakfast. And the question is, yeah, but is that causation? I mean, what's more likely? The question is that cause and effect, or is that just correlation? And I have a whole series of breakfast skipping videos on whether or not we should eat breakfast coming up soon on NutritionFacts.org as part of my chronobiology, my circadian rhythm section. Bottom line, don't skip breakfast. And we'll talk about that more with the time-restricted feeding. If you're going to skip a meal, skip dinner. But that's, again, this little spoiler coming up. In fact, that's what the next two videos are going to be on time-restricted feeding. So we're going to jump right to that. But let me just get one more question. Oh, forget one more question. It's break time. Sorry about that. I'm going to put up the 5-minute timer once again. I mean, if you have a chance, go through these questions, upvote any you want to. If you ask a new question, it's going to be at the bottom of the list, and I might not be able to get to it. So your first priority maybe is to go through, check all the upload all the ones that you want to hear answered. But then, of course, feel free to ask new ones, but just we might not be able to get to it. Okay, because we're in our final hour. But so I'm going to put up the 5-minute. Go through the questions, and I will answer a few more questions before jumping in to time-restricted feeding. All right, we are back. Let's go some more questions. Derek asked, for overall health, longevity, cancer prevention, 16.8, 22.2 really have an impact. So what Derek is talking about is what we're going to do next, time-restricted feeding. So why don't, I'm going to hold off on that until we hit our next two videos. Let me see if there's any others. Oh, here we go. Next one on the list is by Anonymous. If intermittent fasting for fat loss, when's the best time to exercise? Oh, is it better to exercise before eating? Or is it better to exercise after eating? That, remarkably, is a 1,000-study research question. Seriously. And there's people on both sides, and there's evidence on both sides. And that was one of the questions I was eager to ask. Eager to answer when I sat down to write How Not to Diet. It was like skipping breakfast, actually. Skipping breakfast. That's another, I mean, it's a huge research issue with people fighting on both sides, with data all over the place. You really got to read all the original studies and find out what is going on, why some studies show one thing and others show another. And bottom line, spoiler alert, you'll read about it in December in my exercise tweaks chapter, but it's better to exercise before eating. So how long do you have to go without food in order to trigger this beneficial effect? 6 hours. So before breakfast, or if you time it right, you could exercise midday before a late lunch, or if you have an early enough lunch, you could do it before dinner after you got home from work, right? So 6 hours fasting before exercising to maximize fat loss. Right. Oh, I'm so excited I'm so excited to give away some of the juicy stuff from the book. I can't wait to get this book to get out there. All right. Let me do one more. Bhakti asks, after all my research in intermittent fasting, do I do intermittent fasting? And if indeed, what do I do? And the answer is the only thing that has been convincingly, that has resulted in the change of my family's eating patterns is what you're going to see next, time-restricted feeding. Let's go right to it. Somewhere, here we go. Oh, I think we are at 13.
The reason many blood tests are taken before eating after an overnight fast is that meals can tip our system out of balance, bumping up certain biomarkers for disease such as blood sugars, insulin, cholesterol, triglycerides. Yet fewer than 1 in 10 Americans may even make it 12 hours without eating. As evolutionarily unnatural eating 3 meals a day is, most of us are eating even more than that. One study using a smartphone app to record more than 25,000 eating events found that people tended to eat about every 3 hours over an average span of about 15 hours a day. Might it be beneficial to give our bodies a bigger break? Time-restricted feeding is defined as fasting for periods of at least 12 hours, but less than 24 hours. This involves trying to confine calorie intake to a set window of time, typically 3 to 4 hours, 7 to 9 hours, or 10 to 12 hours a day, resulting in a daily fast lasting 12 to 21 hours. When mice are restricted to a daily feeding window, they gain less weight even when fed the exact same amount. Rodents have such high metabolisms, though, that a single day of fasting can starve away as much as 15% of their lean body mass. This makes it difficult to extrapolate from mouse models. You don't know what happens in humans until you put it to the test. The dropout rates in time-restricted feeding trials certainly appear lower than most prolonged forms of intermittent fasting, suggesting it's more easily tolerable, but does it work? If you have people even just stop eating between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. for 2 weeks, they lose about a pound each week compared to no time restriction. Note, no additional instructions or recommendations were given on the amount or type of food consumed, no gadgets, calorie counting, or record keeping. They were just told to limit their food intake to the hours of 6 a.m. through 7 p.m., a simple intervention, easy to understand and implement. The next logical step was to try putting it to the test for months instead of just weeks. Obese men and women were asked to restrict eating to an 8-hour window between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. 12 weeks later, they'd lost 7 pounds. This deceptively simple intervention may be operating from a number of different angles. People tend to eat more food later in the day, and higher fat foods later in the day. By eliminating eating in the late evening hours, one removes prime-time snacking on the couch, a high-risk time for overeating. And indeed, during the no eating after 7 p.m. study, the subjects were inadvertently eating about 250 fewer calories a day. Then there are also the chronobiological benefits of avoiding late-night eating. I'm going to do a whole series of videos about the role our circadian rhythms have in the obesity epidemic, how the timing of meals can be critical, and how we can match meal timing to our body clocks. And just to give you a taste, the exact same number of calories at dinner is significantly more fattening than the same number of calories eaten at breakfast. Calories in the morning cause less weight gain than the same calories given in the evening. A diet with a bigger breakfast causes more weight loss than the same exact diet with a bigger dinner. Nighttime snacks are more fattening than the same snacks in the daytime. Thanks to our circadian rhythms, metabolic slowing, hunger, carbohydrate intolerance, triglycerides, and a propensity for weight gain are all things that go bump in the night. What about the fasting component of the time-restricted feeding? There's already the double benefit of fewer calories and avoiding nighttime eating. Does the fact that you're fasting for 11 or 16 hours a day play any role, considering the average person may only make it about 9 hours a day without eating? How would you design an experiment to test that? What if you randomize people into 2 groups and forced both groups to eat the same number of calories a day, and both to eat late into the evening, but with one group fasting even longer, 20 hours? That's exactly what researchers at the USDA and National Institute of Aging did. Men and women were randomized to eat 3 meals a day, or to fit all those same calories into a 4-hour window between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m., and fast the rest of the day. If the weight loss benefits from the other 2 time-restricted feeding studies was due to the passive calorie restriction or avoidance of late-night eating, then presumably both these groups should end up the same, because they're both eating the same amount and they're both eating late. But that's not what happened. After 8 weeks, the time-restricted feeding group ended up with nearly 5 pounds less body fat, about the same number of calories, but they lost more weight. A similar study with an 8-hour window resulted in 3 pounds more fat loss. So there does seem to be something to giving your body daily breaks from eating around the clock. Because that 4-hour window was at night, though, they suffered the chronobiological consequences, significant elevations in blood pressures and cholesterol levels despite the weight loss. The best of both worlds was demonstrated in 2018, early time-restricted feeding, eating within a narrow window earlier in the day, which we'll cover next.
Isn't that just mind-blowing about the circadian rhythm stuff? That was one of the most fascinating things I learned in my when I was putting together How Not to Diet. Calories in the morning count less and are healthier than calories in the evening. So if you're going to skip a meal, to widen your daily fasting window, skip dinner, not breakfast. And I'll get to the best of both worlds study next, after hitting a few more questions. John Brooks asks, any studies on systemic inflammation, such as CRP and fasting? Absolutely. Fasting lowers markers of systemic inflammation, which may be why it can be so useful in treating a variety of autoimmune diseases, something that I will be covering in my September webinar. As you can see, I cover rheumatoid arthritis, number 4, and number 5, autoimmune diseases in general. All right, let's go back. Anonymous attendee as I am also interested in people with thyroid disorders. How are they affected by fasting? No studies have been done on people with hypo or hyperthyroidism and fasting, to my knowledge. What are the effects of fasting? Another anonymous question. What are the effects of fasting on leptin and ghrelin? You say, what are those? Well, ghrelin is the hunger hormone. And not surprisingly, if you stop eating, hunger hormone goes up. trying to drive you to eat again. And leptin actually leptin goes down, but not when adjusted for fat mass. And what is the implications of that? It's a long story, but I've got chapters on that, on hacking hunger hormones in the upcoming book in December. And in fact, oh, how cool is this? I'm actually going to give a sneak preview webinar on the book called Evidence-Based Weight Loss on my birthday, October 25th. In fact, this is the first time anyone's ever heard about this. You heard about it first. So in September, there's going to be another fasting webinar going through all the other fasting stuff. And then October 25th, I'm going to do I'm going to present my kind of new annual talk or new book talk that I'm going to be giving at 200 cities next year. You'll get to see it first on live, and then we can go through questions and stuff. That's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, so make sure you're subscribed, NutritionFacts.org, to get our monthly email so you can sign up for that. I know a lot of people were disappointed that they couldn't actually get on this intermittent fasting webinar because we close registrations about a week early. Because that just has to do with the platform and getting everyone's emails out and stuff. So make sure you sign up in time for both of those upcoming webinars. All right. Laura asks, what's the difference between a fasting mimicking diet and ketogenesis? So a fasting mimicking diet doesn't share some things with a ketogenic diet. So for example, they both tend to be low in carbohydrates. Ketogenic diet isn't necessarily low in calories. Fasting mimicking diet is the ones that have been tested so far go out of their way to eliminate animal fat, animal protein, and low protein in general, something that you would not necessarily expect from kind of the typical ketogenic diets. And I've got a bunch of videos on ketogenic diets coming up on Nutrition Facts soon. In fact, they're part of the current batch of videos that you can actually view streaming right now. You can see all my ketogenic diet videos right after this, if you wanted to. In a recent blast, I talked about all the upcoming videos. I do all the videos on Nutrition Facts in 26 video chunks and put them all up streaming if you want the preview, if you don't want to wait the few months for them all to go up. And this current batch includes all my ketogenic diet videos. So enjoy if you want to know more about ketogenic diets. And it actually ties in really closely with a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. So after seeing this webinar, you'll be like, oh, I get it. It may make a lot more sense. All right, let us go back to the this next and final video on time-restricted feeding.
Time-restricted feeding, where you try to squeeze the same amount of eating into a narrow evening window, has benefits compared to eating in the evening and earlier in the day, but also has adverse effects because you're eating so much so late. The best of both worlds was demonstrated in 2018, time-restricted feeding into a narrow window earlier in the day. Individuals randomized to eat the same food, but just in an 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. eating window, experienced a drop in blood pressures, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance even when all the study subjects were maintained at the same weight. Same food, same weight, but with different results. The drops in blood pressures were extraordinary, from 123/82 down to 112/72 in 5 weeks, comparable to the effectiveness of potent blood pressure drugs. The longest study to date on time-restricted feeding only lasted 16 weeks, a pilot study with no control group that only involved 8 people, but the results are still worth noting. Overweight individuals who, like most of us, were eating more than 14 hours a day were instructed to stick to a consistent 10 to 12-hour feeding window of their own choosing. On average, they were able to successfully reduce their daily eating duration by about 4.5 hours, and within 16 weeks they had lost 7 pounds. They also reported feeling more energetic and sleeping better. This may help explain why all participants voluntarily expressed their interest in continuing the time-restricted feeding on their own, even after the study ended. You don't often see that after weight loss studies. Even more remarkable, 8 months later, they retained their weight loss and improved energy and sleep. At the 1-year point, maintained their boosted energy and sleep, and kept the weight off, all from one of the simplest of interventions, just telling people to stick to a consistent 10 to 12-hour feeding window of their own choosing. How did it work? Even though they weren't told to change nutrition quality or quantity, they appeared to unintentionally eat hundreds of fewer calories a day. With self-selected time frames, you wouldn't necessarily think to expect circadian benefits, but because subjects were asked to keep the eating window consistent throughout the week, metabolic jet lag could be minimized. The thinking is that because people tend to start their days later on weekends, that's disrupting their circadian rhythm. And indeed, it's like they flew a few time zones west on Friday evening and flew back east on Monday morning. So some of the metabolic advantage may actually be due to maintaining a more regular eating schedule. Early or midday time-restricted feeding may have other benefits as well. Prolonged nightly fasting with reduced evening food intake has been associated with lower levels of inflammation and better blood sugar control, both of which might be expected to lower the risk of diseases such as breast cancer. So, data was collected on thousands of breast cancer survivors to see if nightly fasting duration made a difference. Those who couldn't go more than 13 hours every night without eating had a 36% higher risk of cancer recurrence. These findings have led to the suggestion that efforts to avoid eating after 8 p.m. and fast for 13 hours or more overnight may be a beneficial consideration for those patients looking to decrease cancer risk and recurrence, though we'd need a randomized controlled trial to know for sure. Early time-restricted feeding may even play a role in the health of perhaps the longest-living population in the world, the Seventh-day Adventist Blue Zone in California. Slim, vegetarian, nut-eating, exercising, non-smoking Adventists live about a decade longer than the general population. Their greater life expectancy has been ascribed to these healthy lifestyle behaviors, but there's one lesser-known component that also may be playing a role. Historically, eating 2 large meals a day, breakfast and lunch, with a prolonged overnight fast was a part of Adventist teachings. Today, only about 1 in 10 Adventists surveyed were eating just 2 meals a day, but most, over 60%, reported breakfast or lunch was their largest meal of the day. Though this is yet to be studied with respect to longevity, front-loading one's calories earlier in the day with a prolonged nightly fast has been associated with significant weight loss over time, leading the researchers to conclude that eating breakfast and lunch 5 to 6 hours apart and making the overnight fast last 18 to 19 hours may be a useful practical strategy for weight control. The wait may be worth the wait.
That was my big takeaway from all the intermittent fasting research I looked at. If possible, eat earlier in the day. So now I try to eat dinner early. I know that's not possible for everyone, but most people should at least be able to avoid late night eating whenever possible. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, with or without an early popper's dinner would probably be the best. All right, so we have about a half an hour left to go through. Let's just hit as many questions as we can get through. We have 184. I'm not sure we can quite get that, but we can get some, at least some of the most popular ones, out of the way. All right, Jane asks, I'm healthy, plant-based, underweight, also old. Should I fast? Well, the question is, what do you hope to gain from that? If you're underweight and eating healthy, presumably you're already benefiting from caloric restriction, but you could certainly get additional chronobiological benefits by shifting the meal distribution of your day. Emily asks, why can you lose weight by only dropping 10 calories a day per pound if you're eating whole food plant-based? Yes, understand that you're more full, but when you want to have that 55 rule the same. Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. It's confusing. So eating, right, just restricting quantity, then you have to do that 55 calories. It takes a lot more caloric restriction to per pound. In fact, 5 times more. And why? Because your appetite goes through the roof, and you just start eating more. And so you cannot take advantage of that 10 calories per pound rule unless you can somehow get rid of your appetite. And so the ketogenic diet folks say, I'll get rid of your appetite by putting you in ketosis and make you so nauseous that you're not going to want to eat. And that's what my series of ketogenic diet videos goes into, again, which you can watch right now, or very soon they'll be up on NutritionFacts.org. Or you can eat really healthy foods. And so there's a study where they took people eating standard American diet and gave them, so many fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans that they cut their caloric intake from about 3,000 calories a day, so these are big people, down to 1,500 calories a day and didn't notice a difference. Seriously, like they ate as much as they wanted, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, and they cut more than 1,000 calories from their daily diet. They were eating half the calories and with no hunger. And the reason is because they're absolutely stuffed. I mean, you can eat hundreds of cups a day of certain vegetables and not gain weight and continue to lose weight, like wheelbarrows full. And that's a caloric density thing, but there's all sorts of other things that go into this. One of the 17 criteria, another one, thylakoids. I'll be talking about thylakoids, green plant membranes. It's part of my October 25th. It's a part of the book, but I'll premiere it October 25th in the evidence-based weight loss webinar. The next question is from Tricia. Can fasting help heal migraines? Fasting is more likely to trigger migraines than it is to help migraines. However, if you noticed in the September webinar, I am going to be covering one type of headache that may benefit, and that is post-traumatic brain injury headache. People who suffer brain trauma, head trauma, can get these horrible chronic headaches. And that's something we may be able to help, but migraines, unfortunately, not. In fact, fasting can be a migraine trigger. Aaron says, what have we learned about fasting as it relates to stem cells? Ooh, could it help with blood cancers that are treated with stem cell transplants? I'm currently actually working on all the cancer. It looks like 3, 4, 5 cancer videos for this next fasting webinar. I'm still working on them now, so I'm going to hold off on answering fasting and cancer questions just because I don't even know it yet. It's not that I'm trying to hold out, but it's a very big, complicated literature. And so I want to get it right before I tell anybody anything. Next question is from an anonymous user saying, what can we do if intermittent fasting causes nightly leg cramps? We're not actually sure what causes nocturnal leg cramps. In many cases, it doesn't seem to be kind of a specific trigger. However, sometimes cramps are caused by overexertion of muscles, structural deformities like flat feet, standing on concrete during the day, prolonged sitting, inappropriate leg positions when sedentary, or dehydration. Less common causes, which is if all of a sudden you start getting nocturnal leg cramps out of the blue, you want to see your medical professional, is that less common causes diabetes, Parkinson's, hypoglycemia, anemia, thyroid functions, hormonal disorders. There's certain medications that can do it as well. Some things you can try to stave off future leg cramps is stay super hydrated, something that's very important to do when you're fasting anyway. So 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. And because dehydration may play a role in the cramping, we want to be stretching your calves throughout the day and at night. You know, riding a stationary bicycle for a few minutes before bedtime can help, especially if you're not getting a lot of exercise throughout the day. Keeping your blankets loose at the foot of your bed to prevent your toes and feet from pointing downward also may help while you sleep. Aquatic exercises have been shown to help. You know, wearing good shoes during the day. When cramping does occur at night, you want to walk on or jiggle the affected leg, then elevate it. You want to straighten your leg, flex your foot towards your knee. If you can, grab your toes, pull it upwards towards your knee, and you should feel your calf muscle stretching, and that should help break the cramp. Hot shower, warm bath, ice massage to the cramp muscle may also help as well. All right, that's probably more than anyone wanted to know about nocturnal leg cramping, but there you go. All right, so we did that question. Let me check it off the list. Ooh, can fasting affect memory? Okay, so when I, during the intermittent fasting, so I talked a little bit about the cognition piece, saying that basically one might presume that fasting would interfere with thinking, but it's actually the data's all over the place, and so certain even the studies that show there's some kind of cognitive dysfunction associated with short-term fasting, they can't agree on what part of cognition is affected, whether it's executive function or short-term memory or on down the list. And so we just don't have a good sense of what fasting does towards our cognition, unfortunately. All right. That seemed to have disappeared. That's good. Okay. Perimenopause and fasting. So the question from Jennifer is, look, just having difficulty losing weight perimenopausally. I wrote a book for you, just for you, Jennifer. How Not to Diet, be out in December. And so the first half of the book, you know how like How Not to Die was cut into two sections. In the first half, 15 chapters, 15 leading causes of death, talking about their whole diet, meal plan, preventing, arresting, reversing, each of the top 15 killers. Second half of the book didn't want to just be a reference book, wanted to be like a practical guide. I did the daily dozen, the traffic light system, you know, putting into practice. So similarly in How Not to Diet, first half is going to be 17 criteria for an optimal weight loss diet. So instead of just playing whack-a-mole, talking about all the diets du jour, I don't want the book to be outdated by the time it even comes out. So I want to just, here's the criteria you can put against any future diet or any meal plan, or individual food, and see whether would fit into optimal weight loss. One of those is low in calorie density, but there's 16 others. Okay, but then the second half of the book, and so then you could actually build from scratch, from the ground up, the ideal weight loss diet. Okay, so why isn't that the end of the book? We still got another 400 pages, a long book. Okay, so what's the rest of the book? The rest of the book is, you're doing everything right. What can we do to accelerate weight loss even further? So weight loss boosters. So instead of the daily dozen, have the 21 tweaks. So we're actually going to be expanding the Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen app, the free app on iPhone and Android. So there's going to be a weight loss. So you can switch it over to the weight loss function. And so in addition to the Daily Dozen, it gives all the 21 tweaks, all the other things you can do. So there's spices, for example, simple, cheap spices, literally pennies a day, shown to accelerate weight loss in double-blind, placebo-controlled trials because they're so potent, you can stick them into a pill. So you can prove that indeed they cause weight loss, like ginger powder and garlic powder and how much to take, everything. That's all part of the 21 tweaks. And so just like going on in How Not to Die, going on a healthy plant-based diet, the average blood pressure is perfect, right? 110/65. The average cholesterol is perfect, you know, under 150 total. But it's a bell curve. Some people, even though they're eating healthy, can have higher cholesterol, can have higher blood pressure. That's why I go into specific foods like hibiscus tea, flax seeds that can lower high blood pressure. So the same thing. Those eating, you know, really healthy diets, ideal weight. But it's a bell curve. And some people, even if they're eating really healthy, still have some stubborn pounds to lose. So there are specific foods that act as fat blockers and starch blockers and appetite suppressants and metabolic boosters, and on down the list. And so that's the second half of the book. Hopefully that will help you for those stubborn perimenopausal pounds. All right, Chris says, will I cover fasting aids? What we should be eating and drinking during intermittent fast to mitigate the negative effects of the fast? Well, okay. So if you're fasting, if you're completely fasting, you're not eating anything. But in terms of negative effects of the fast, well, I did talk about how in the alternate day, and you can go back and look at this. Remember, you get the recording of this whole webinar, and you're going to have the individual videos high res. You can just go back and specifically go to that alternate day fasting video where I talk about how it matters very much so what you eat on your alternate day. So this was I believe it was artery function, showing that you can actually make things worse if you eat a lot of, saturated fat, no surprise, on your feast day or on your eating day. In general, so we want to eat a healthy diet at all times, so that includes our feasting day, which should just make things beneficial in general. And I think that's one of the keys to some of the long-term benefits you see. For example, in the True North protocol of fasting, it's not just a water-only fasting, but then they put people on a whole food plant-based diet without added salt, oil, sugar. So it's very healthy, so in hopes to retaining some of those benefits. Who cares if it drops blood pressures if then when you go back to eating, it goes back up? Well, how about we jumpstart the drop in blood pressure, then put people on a really healthy diet to maintain that? That's kind of the theory. Does it actually work in practice? We will find out. They've actually published. It's so beautiful. They've done a lot of research, and they have tons more research coming out, and I promise to do videos on all of them. All right, Marty. Oh, no, we did. Yes, okay. So Marty asks, how about drinking water while fasting? Very important, drinking water while fasting, absolutely. But what about a little bit of sea salt for the electrolytes? Would it reduce the hunger feeling? I don't think drinking water reduces the hunger feeling, but what it reduces the dehydration feeling. You absolutely have to, it's critical to have optimally functioning kidneys while you're fasting, because they're doing a lot of the titrating to make sure you don't run into problems. And they can only do their job when you get enough water. I raised the specter of sodium loss. For example, if you lose too much sodium, you wash out the electrolytes in your brain, you can actually run into real problems, including coma and death. So why not just add a little, if it's a sodium problem, add sodium. But the problem is we don't know, unless you get your electrolytes tested, whether it's a sodium problem or not. There's also potassium problems. There's other electrolytes that are important. That's why you can't just DIY it when it comes to extended water-only fasting, because you can run into real problems. I hope that comes through clear in this, if anything comes through clear in this webinar. I hope that helps. Anonymous asks, does fasting exacerbate adrenal fatigue? So adrenal fatigue is really kind of like a made up, I wonder if it's a naturopath term. It's not considered an actual entity in mainstream medicine. And it's just a way to sell people supplements by labeling people. So it's like, it reminds me of Candida, the Candida syndrome thing, Candida hypersensitivity. I have videos on that. Some of the post-Lyme stuff has those qualities. Some of the SIBO stuff. Unfortunately, you can't, I don't know. Let's, but if there's specific symptoms you want to talk about, I'd be happy to talk about it. But adrenal fatigue as a entity doesn't really exist. Marty, we already did the water question. Fantastic. Okay. Catherine says, I've learned about eating a whole food plant-based lifestyle increases thermogenesis. Ooh, that's exciting. term. So when figuring out someone's basal metabolic rate, the number of calories to reduce weight loss, what percentage change in metabolic increase in people eating, blah, 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 blah. Okay, woo! This is a great question. Okay. So I'm actually going to be addressing Catherine's point in my October 25th evidence-based weight loss talk, as well as in the book. The fact that it's not just calories inside of the equation. So the reason people who are eating plant-based so people eating strictly plant-based are perfectly ideal weight on average. And the reason why there seem to be so many benefits in terms of weight loss for those eating plant-based diets is not just the calorie density and the calories inside of the equation, but also the calories outside. So people eating more plant-based have a higher resting metabolic rate between 11% and 20%. And so that could be literally hundreds of calories a day. And so resting metabolic rate, so that's the amount of calories you burn just existing, just living. I mean, your heart has to pump and your brain, your brain uses lots of energy just to think. You burn 1,300 calories a day doing nothing. Lying in bed all day, you burn 1,300 calories. We have this voracious brain. But you do that same thing, but you randomize people, switch them to a more plant-based diet, and all of a sudden it goes up to 1,500 calories. So you're burning 200 more calories doing nothing, right? And so that may be one of the reasons why plant-based diets were found to be the most effective weight loss diet ever tested without like an exercise regimen or portion control ever published in peer-reviewed medical literature. This is the Broad study out of New Zealand. I'm going to be talking a lot about the Broad study. In fact, I'm giving a TEDx talk in Bismarck, is that North Dakota, South Dakota, next month, and it'll be online, specifically talking about that study. Anyway, lots to go through that, but very exciting. And of course, happy to be talking about many of that, but we are running low on time, so let me move on. Okay, another anonymous question. I heard the past 40, you should fast for 20 hours or more, and that anything less would not be as efficient, and that you need to eat only protein when you finish your fast, and let an hour pass before having a meal. Is that true? I've never heard such a thing. Certainly nothing like that published in the peer-reviewed medical literature, and that doesn't even make sense to me. No. Is that true? Maybe it's true, but it's not something that I have ever run across, to say the least. Marsh asked, does intermittent fasting slow down your basal metabolic rate? Yes, any kind of caloric restriction. We were hoping, and again, you can rewind and go back and look at those alternate day fasting videos, which is the best studied intermittent fasting. And you can see that, the hope of intermittent fasting is that it would prevent that metabolic slowdown, right? So when you cut calories day by day, your metabolism slows down, so it's more difficult to lose weight. The hope was, well, by going back and forth, alternative day fasting or some of these other regimens of intermittent fasting, we would be able to trick the body into not slowing down metabolism, and it just doesn't work. We get the same kind of metabolic slowdown either way. So we were hoping that'd be a benefit of intermittent fasting. It turned out it didn't work. However, there is something you can eat to counteract the metabolic slowdown. I have a whole chapter on it. Spoiler alert, cayenne pepper, actually. Yeah. So actually one of my tweaks, I hope I get this right. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper a day. But there's an alternate for people that don't like spicy foods. People on cayenne, capsaicin, the kind of spicy ingredient, the natural compound found that makes hot peppers spicy. Oh, you can also eat, I forget what that is in like fresh jalapenos, but I have a conversion in there. And it actually, you go calorie restriction and your metabolism does not slow down if you eat hot peppers. It comes out to, I believe, a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper a day, and that translates into all sorts of other different peppers, which I go into. Let me actually just peek to make sure it's a 1/4 before I tell somebody that. All right, I'm actually going to just peek it real quick. You think I'd have all this memorized, but it's a long book. All right, hold on. I'm just going to search cayenne. I can't even spell cayenne. That would help. There we go. And of course, the subtitle of the section is Some Like It Hot, of course. No, half teaspoon a day, or a teaspoon a day of ground ginger. That's one of my 21 tweaks. Half teaspoon a day of cayenne pepper, or a teaspoon a day of ground ginger. In terms of preventing the metabolic slowing. All right. The next question on the list, Vesna asks, what about juice fasting? So juice fasting really isn't fasting at all, right? You can, once you remove fiber from food, you can get tremendous amount of calories. I mean, especially, you drinking fruit juice, you get hundreds of calories, as much calories as like soda. So it's like juice feasting, potentially, depending on how much juice you drink, obviously. If you, just have a cup or two, then that's a very low calorie diet. And that could be equivalent of some of these kind of modified fasting regimens. But like all you can drink juice may not cut calories at all. James asks, how does intermittent fasting affect human growth hormone? And is that a good thing? Well, I know it affects, so it decreases IGF-1, which is a fantastic thing. Insulin-like growth factor 1, the cancer-promoting growth hormone. And that's part of the same human growth hormone axis. It's called the HGH-IGF-1 axis. So I presume growth hormone goes down, but it's not something I've looked at particularly because I was interested in the cancer connection. But I would presume the answer is yes, but I would have to check on that. Okay, Tiffany asked, is one meal a day a safe form of prolonged intermittent fasting? Okay, so one meal a day would be a form of kind of time-restricted feeding, right? So that would be a really tight window. Is that a safe form? Yeah, unless you did it at night. So if you had one late meal at night, that would actually be bad, right? We're supposed to front load our calories earlier in the day. We have negative metabolic effects by eating calories at night. And so if you put all your calories at night, that would be bad. And that would be bad for a variety of reasons. As you know, again, I have this long series of videos on chronobiology. In fact, so many, I had to actually split them up because otherwise it would just be like for months on end, just talking about our circadian rhythms and all these really cool ways about meal timing and exercise timing. And it's just super fascinating to me. And I think people really love it. But there's so many videos I actually had to like, all right, let's talk about celery or something in between because otherwise it'd be too much. Anyway, but if your one meal was breakfast, that would probably be the best, or at least it's the biggest meal of the day. That would be the safest way to do one meal a day. Okay, James Turley asks, how does intermittent fasting, we already did that. Okay, I forgot to click that off. Aaron says, bit confused, should healthy weight people consider caloric restriction? Or those benefits are people who are a bit overweight? That's a great question. So the calorie study, this study that purported to show, not just purported, actually found, she's amazing litany of benefits of this mild caloric restriction was in quote unquote normal weight people. You know what normal weight is in the United States is overweight, right? So, I mean, I think the average BMI was somewhere around 26. No, yeah, so they were overweight on average. They weren't obese on average, but they were overweight. Kind of like the average, it might even be less than the average of the American populace. And so tremendous benefits for chronic caloric restriction for people who are overweight, who are getting excess calories by definition because they're overweight. Would you get those same benefits if you were already ideal weight? We don't have those studies to support that. The ideal body mass index. So normal is supposed to be between 18 and 25, but ideal 20 to 22. So you want to get your BMI. So there's actually a difference in disease rates between 21 and 24, even though they're supposed to be both ideal body weight. No, ideal body weight is BMI between 20 and 22. Get down to that, one might not get those kind of benefits that we see when we put overweight people or normal US weight people on through calorie restriction. Thank you so much for asking that question. All right. Oh, is there any evidence regarding fasting and psychological well-being? Asked Mariano. And that is indeed will be covered. I do mental illness and BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, on my September webinar. So September webinar is like fasting as a reversal of disease. And the only kind of disease reversal we covered today was pretty much was obesity, was weight loss, with some exceptions, right? We talked about the longevity a little bit, but with alternate day fasting. But yeah, so, but that's one of the things I'm going to cover in the September one. I hope you will join me. Okay. Oh, and that's going to be on a Sunday, which might be easier for people than doing it on a weekday. All right. Angela asked, when we fast, do we reduce our bodies to ketosis? Yeah, if you fast long enough, may take 36 hours or so before we have that metabolic switch to switch our brains over to mostly ketones, but not exclusively. And so what do I think about inducing ketosis for psychotic diseases? I have not looked at, is there any schizophrenia? I don't know of any schizophrenia. It's schizophrenia. Ketogenic diet work. Let me see if anything pops up. Doing a quick PubMed search, go to pubmed.gov. Oh, there was just a paper, a review published last year. Yeah, let me check it out. Yeah, so as you see in the list of ketogenic diets I've already done, I talk about ketogenic diets for cancer and a bunch of other things, but I did not cover mental illness, and it looks like there's some data out there. And so the question is just preclinical data, meaning like, schizophrenic rodents or something, or is it actually on human data? And if I find some good stuff, I'll definitely let you know. I do have some videos on schizophrenia coming up about some nutrition topic. I don't even remember, but it's definitely on the list, and it's something that I care deeply about. All right. Oh, we are getting towards the end here. Let me close out here. I hope everyone learned an absolute ton. I know, so I certainly did. Look, I learn as much as anyone else doing these videos. During my monthly live Q&A sessions, right? You'll note I basically only have two kinds of answers, right? One is, oh, check out my video on the topic, or I have no idea, I'll look into it, right? That's because I don't know any of this stuff either. You think I was taught about any of this in medical school, right? So I've got to dive into the primary medical literature like anybody else, dig up all the original studies, and figure it out myself, and just so honored to be able to share this information with all of you. And I appreciate all of you for making a donation to NutritionFacts.org by joining this webinar so I can keep doing what I do. Hope to see you again next time. Look at that, to the second. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.